Thunder Jackson had spent 40 years earning his reputation as the most feared Hells Angels rider on the West Coast. His leather jacket told stories of bar fights, cross-country runs, and brotherhood forged in steel and gasoline. But standing in that dusty livestock auction outside Bakersfield, staring at a tiny horse no bigger than a large dog, something stirred in his weathered heart that he hadn't felt in decades. The little creature was skin and bones, trembling in a makeshift pen, while cruel laughter echoed from the crowd. When the auctioneer called for $50, Thunder's hand shot up before his brain could stop it. But what happens when the toughest man on two wheels discovers that saving something small might just save him too? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Harley-Davidson Iron Thunder sat gleaming in the early morning light outside the Desert Vipers clubhouse, its chrome reflecting the desert sun like a mirror of memories. Thunder Jackson ran his calloused fingers along the fuel tank, tracing the custom pinstriping he'd applied 23 years ago after his discharge from the Army. The bike was more than transportation. It was identity, freedom, and the only constant in a life that had seen too many goodbyes. Inside the clubhouse, the familiar smell of motor oil, leather, and yesterday's bourbon hung in the air like incense in a cathedral of rebellion. The walls were decorated with photographs spanning 4 decades of brotherhood, each image capturing moments of wild rides, charitable runs, and the bonds that held men together when the rest of the world turned its back. Thunder's own face appeared in many of these pictures, growing older and more weathered with each passing year. But his eyes always held that same fierce independence that had earned him his road name. Morning. "Old man," called out Razor, the club's current president, a mountain of a man whose beard had gone completely grey, but whose arms still looked like they could bend steel. "You heading out to that auction today?" Thunder nodded, pulling on his leather jacket. The garment was a masterpiece of lived experience, covered in patches that told the story of his journey. The death head logo of the Hells Angels took center stage on the back, but smaller patches revealed a more complex narrative. A purple heart from his service in Desert Storm, a memorial patch for his late wife, Catherine, who had passed 7 years ago from cancer. Route markers from cross-country rides that had taken him from the Canadian border to the Mexican Gulf. "Just looking for some cheap livestock equipment," Thunder replied, though he couldn't quite explain the restlessness that had been gnawing at him for weeks. At 62, he found himself questioning things that had once seemed certain. The brotherhood was still strong, but many of his oldest friends were gone now, claimed by accidents, illness, or simply the passage of time. The wild nights that had once defined his existence now left him feeling empty rather than alive. His apartment reflected this growing sense of isolation. Located above an auto repair shop he'd owned for the past 15 years, it was sparse and functional. A single bedroom, a kitchen he rarely used for anything more elaborate than heating canned soup, and a living room dominated by a worn leather recliner positioned in front of a television that mostly played old war movies or motorcycle racing. The walls held a few photographs, mostly of Catherine and his estranged daughter Maya, whose absence in his life felt like a wound that refused to heal. Thunder had met Catherine at a veterans support group 35 years ago. She'd been volunteering. He'd been court-ordered to attend after a bar fight that had gotten out of hand. She saw past the anger and the leather to the scared young man beneath, the soldier who'd come home from war to find that civilian life felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Their marriage had been passionate but turbulent, complicated by Thunder's inability to express vulnerability and his tendency to disappear for days on long rides when emotions got too heavy. Maya had been born 2 years into their marriage, a beautiful child with Catherine's gentle eyes and Thunder's stubborn streak. But fatherhood had terrified Thunder in ways that combat never had. He loved his daughter fiercely, but he didn't know how to show it without feeling like he was exposing a weakness that his hard-earned reputation couldn't afford. Instead, he'd worked longer hours at the shop, taken more rides with the club, and gradually become a stranger in his own home. The divorce had been inevitable, though no less painful for its predictability. Catherine had remarried a teacher named Robert, a steady man who could give Maya the stability Thunder never managed to provide. Maya had taken her stepfather's name, and Thunder's attempts to maintain a relationship had gradually dwindled to awkward birthday cards and missed phone calls. Now at 28, she was a successful architect living in Portland, and they hadn't spoken in over 3 years. The morning ritual of preparing for a ride had become meditation for Thunder. He checked the oil, examined the tires, and polished every chrome surface until it gleamed. Iron Thunder had been his companion for nearly 3 decades, rebuilt and modified so many times that very little of the original motorcycle remained. But like the ship of Theseus, its identity transcended its individual components. It was the vessel that had carried him through grief, anger, celebration, and solitude. As he wheeled the bike out into the desert morning, Thunder felt the familiar surge of anticipation that preceded any journey, no matter how short. The road held possibilities that walls never could. Out there, with nothing but asphalt ahead and the rumble of the engine beneath him, he could almost believe that the next mile might bring something different. Something that would fill the growing emptiness that no amount of bourbon or brotherhood seemed able to touch. The livestock auction in Bakersfield was something he'd heard about from Diesel, another club member who'd picked up a trailer there last month. Thunder told himself he was just looking for equipment for the shop, maybe some tools or hardware that might be useful. But as he guided Iron Thunder onto Highway 58, heading west toward the Central Valley, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding towards something more significant than a simple equipment purchase. The desert landscape rolled past in waves of brown and gold, punctuated by the occasional oil derrick or wind farm. This was country Thunder knew well, having ridden these roads countless times over the decades. But today something felt different. Maybe it was the quality of the light, or the way the morning air carried scents of sage and distant rain. Or maybe it was simply the recognition that at 62, he was running out of time to find whatever it was he'd been searching for all these years. The Kern County Livestock Auction sat on the outskirts of Bakersfield like a weathered monument to rural commerce. Thunder could hear the auctioneer's rapid-fire chant, even before he parked Iron Thunder in the dusty lot between pickup trucks and horse trailers. The sound carried on the hot afternoon air, mixing with the lowing of cattle and the nervous whinnying of horses. He'd been to plenty of these auctions over the years, usually looking for tools or equipment that ranchers were selling off. But he'd never paid much attention to the animals themselves. The auction barn was a cavernous metal building that had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the dirt floor and weathered wooden bleachers. The air was thick with dust, hay, and the unmistakable smell of livestock. Thunder found a seat in the back, his leather jacket drawing curious glances from the predominantly rural crowd of ranchers, horse traders, and bargain hunters. For the first hour, he watched with mild interest as cattle, sheep, and riding horses were led through the sale ring. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice like a machine gun, rattled off lot numbers and starting bids, while assistants moved the animals with practiced efficiency. Thunder found himself oddly mesmerized by the rhythm of it all. The ancient dance of commerce that had been playing out in venues like this for generations. Then they brought out the miniature horses. Thunder had never seen anything like them. These weren't ponies, which he knew were simply small horses. These were proportioned like full-sized horses, but stood no taller than a large dog. The first few that came through the ring were well-groomed and obviously well cared for, their coats shining under the harsh lights as their handlers led them in, circles for the bidders to examine. But then came lot number 47. The tiny horse that stumbled into the ring was barely bigger than a golden retriever. its coat dull and patchy with neglect. Ribs showed clearly through its thin hide, and it moved with the uncertain gait of an animal that hadn't been properly fed in far too long. One of its eyes was clouded with what looked like an old injury, and its mane hung in tangled knots that spoke of months without proper grooming. The laughter started immediately. "Look at that little rat," someone called out from the bleachers. "Somebody's gonna need a magnifying glass to ride that thing. $50 says it doesn't make it through the winter," another voice added, prompting more cruel chuckles from the crowd. Thunder felt something twist in his chest as he watched the little creature huddle against the far wall of the sale ring, clearly terrified by the noise and attention. Its good eye darted frantically around the room, seeking escape that didn't exist. There was something in that eye, an intelligence and awareness that reminded Thunder of wounded soldiers he'd known, beings who had endured more than any living thing should have to bear. The auctioneer seemed eager to move past this particular lot. "We've got a miniature horse here, folks. Obviously needs some work, but these little fellas can make good pets for the right family. What am I bid? Do I hear $25? Silence stretched across the auction barn. The handlers tried to encourage the tiny horse to move around the ring, but it pressed itself against the wall, trembling visibly. Thunder could see the resignation in the auctioneer's face, the look of a man preparing to declare no sale and send the animal back to whatever fate awaited unwanted livestock. $20. The auctioneer tried, his voice losing some of its practiced enthusiasm. 15? More silence. Thunder watched as some of the crowd began to lose interest, turning their attention to the program to see what was coming up next. The tiny horse seemed to sense the abandonment, pressing itself even smaller against the wall. $10 then. Surely someone can use this little fella for something. Thunder found himself leaning forward in his seat, his hands gripping the aluminum paddle he'd been given when he registered. He thought about all the times in his life when he'd felt that same desperate isolation, standing in rooms full of people who saw him as a problem to be solved or ignored. The night Catherine had asked for a divorce, the day Maya had told him she was changing her last name, the countless moments when his reputation as the toughest Hell's Angel on the West Coast had felt more like a prison than a source of pride. $5. The auctioneer's voice had taken on a pleading quality. "Come on, folks, $5 for a miniature horse?" The seconds ticked by in silence. Thunder could see the handlers preparing to lead the little horse out of the ring, back to whatever holding pen awaited animals that couldn't find buyers. He thought about Diesel's offhand comment about the auction, how Thunder had convinced himself he was just looking for equipment, but sitting there in the harsh fluorescent light, watching a helpless creature that nobody wanted, he realized he'd been lying to himself. $50, the words left Thunder's mouth before his brain could stop them. His paddle shot up into the air, aluminum number 47 catching the light like a beacon. The auctioneer's head snapped toward him, relief flooding across the man's weathered face. "We have $50 from paddle 47, the auctioneer called out, his machine gun cadence returning. $50 bid, now 55, now 55. Would you give me 55? But the barn had fallen silent. Every head had turned to stare at the leather-clad biker holding up his paddle in the back row. Thunder could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of surprise and amusement in their faces. He'd just bid $50 on what many of them clearly considered a worthless animal, and they couldn't quite process what they were seeing. $50 going once, the auctioneer continued, scanning the crowd for any competing bids. $50 going twice. He paused, giving the crowd one last chance. "Sold to paddle 47 for $50. The crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the barn like a gunshot, final and irreversible. Thunder lowered his paddle, suddenly aware that his hands were shaking slightly. Around him, conversations resumed in hushed tones, and he caught fragments of commentary that ranged from bewildered to openly mocking. "Did you see that biker just bought the sick one? $50 for that little thing. More money than sense. Probably going to use it for target practice." Thunder stood up from the bleachers, his legs feeling oddly unsteady. He made his way down to the checkout area, where a teenage girl with a clipboard was waiting for him, with a mixture of curiosity and barely suppressed giggles. "That'll be $55 with the buyer's premium," she said, trying to maintain professional composure. "You'll need to pick up your, horse from pen 12 out back." Thunder handed over three $20 bills, pocketing the change and the receipt. As he walked toward the back of the barn, he could feel eyes following him, could hear the whispered conversations that trailed in his wake. Part of him wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend this had all been some kind of mistake or practical joke. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for far too long, urged him forward. Pen 12 was a small enclosure behind the main barn, little more than a chain-link fence surrounding a patch of hard-packed dirt. The tiny horse stood in the center of the space, looking even smaller and more fragile in the harsh afternoon sunlight. A handler, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was waiting with a worn halter and lead rope. "This your horse?" the handler asked, clearly struggling to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Thunder nodded, stepping closer to the fence. Up close, the little horse's condition was even more heartbreaking. Its coat was dull and lifeless, and he could count every rib beneath the thin hide. But it was the eyes that got to him. Despite the obvious neglect and abuse, there was still a spark of spirit there, a refusal to give up that Thunder recognized from his own darkest moments. "What's its name?" Thunder asked. The handler shrugged. "Tag just says Lot 47. Previous owner probably didn't bother naming it." Thunder watched as the young man slipped the halter over the tiny horse's head. The animal didn't resist, but it didn't cooperate either. It simply stood there with the patient resignation of a being that had learned not to expect kindness from the world. "You got a trailer or something?" the handler asked. "These little guys don't ride well in truck beds." Thunder realized he hadn't thought that far ahead. In all his years of riding, he'd never had to transport anything larger than spare parts or camping gear. The practical reality of what he'd just done was beginning to sink in. "I'll figure something out," he said, taking the lead rope from the handler's outstretched hand. The drive back to the desert was an exercise in improvisation and growing panic. Thunder had managed to borrow a small livestock trailer from another auction attendee for $40, but he'd never towed anything behind Iron Thunder before. The tiny horse, which he'd started thinking of as the little guy, rode in the trailer with the patience of the defeated, occasionally shifting its weight when Thunder took a turn too sharply or braked too hard. By the time they reached Thunder's property, a modest 5-acre spread 30 miles outside of town, the sun was beginning to set behind the San Gabriel Mountains. Thunder had bought the place 10 years ago as an investment, thinking he might retire there someday. It had a small house, a barn that hadn't seen use in decades, and enough space to work on motorcycles without neighbors complaining about the noise. Getting the tiny horse out of the trailer proved easier than expected. Despite its obvious fear and weakness, the animal seemed to understand that this might be an improvement over its previous circumstances. Thunder led it into the old barn, which smelled of dust and neglect, but was structurally sound. He'd rigged up a makeshift stall, using some old plywood and chicken wire he'd found in a storage shed. "Okay, little guy," Thunder said, his voice sounding strange in the silence of the barn. "I guess we're roommates now." The tiny horse looked up at him with its one good eye, and Thunder felt that same uncomfortable tightness in his chest that had prompted him to bid at the auction. He'd acted on impulse, driven by some half-formed sense of recognition and compassion. But now, standing in a dusty barn with an animal he knew nothing about, the magnitude of what he'd committed to was beginning to dawn on him. The first problem was food. Thunder had exactly 3 cans of beer, half a box of stale crackers, and a frozen dinner in his refrigerator. He had no idea what miniature horses ate, beyond the obvious assumption that it was probably similar to regular horses. A quick trip to the feed store in town yielded a bag of hay, some oats, and advice from the clerk that he needed to be careful not to overfeed an animal that was obviously malnourished. "Start slow," the clerk had warned. a weathered man who'd spent his life around livestock. Animal that thin, you give it too much too fast, it'll make it sick. Little bit at a time, let its system adjust. Thunder spent the evening watching the tiny horse eat small portions of hay with an almost desperate hunger that made his heart ache. He'd set up an old camping chair in the barn and found himself oddly mesmerized by the simple act of watching another living thing find sustenance and safety. Around midnight, he called Dr. Sarah Chen. Thunder had met Dr. Chen 3 years ago when she'd treated an injured dog that had wandered onto his property. She was a small animal veterinarian who also worked with horses, and she'd impressed him with her competence and lack of judgment about his lifestyle. She was also one of the few people in town who called him by his real name, Jackson, rather than Thunder. Jackson, it's midnight. Her voice was thick with sleep, but not angry. This better be good. I bought a miniature horse today, Thunder said, realizing how ridiculous it sounded, even as the words left his mouth. At an auction. It's in pretty bad shape, and I don't know what I'm doing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Thunder could almost hear Dr. Chen processing this information, trying to reconcile the image of the tough biker she knew with the man who'd just called her about rescuing a tiny horse. "Where are you?" she asked finally. "At my place." "The barn. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't feed it anything else until I get there." Dr. Chen arrived in a pickup truck that had seen better decades, her veterinary bag in one hand and a large coffee in the other. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with graying black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of steady competence that came from years of dealing with both animals, and they're often difficult. "Owners, let's see what we're working with," she said, setting her bag down and approaching the makeshift stall. Thunder watched as she examined the tiny horse with gentle, practiced hands. Her face remained professionally neutral, but he could see the concern in her eyes as she noted the animal's condition. "Male, probably around 8 or 9 years old," she said, checking his teeth and running her hands along his ribs. "Severely underweight, dehydrated, and that eye injury looks old but infected. Whoever owned him before wasn't taking care of him. Can you fix him?" Thunder asked, surprised by the urgency in his own voice. Dr. Chen looked up at him, and for a moment he saw something like surprise in her expression. In the 3 years she'd known him, she'd never seen him show concern for anything beyond motorcycles and his own solitude. "He's in rough shape, but he's young enough to recover if we're careful. It's going to take time, though, weeks, maybe months, to get him back to full health. And it's going to require daily care, consistent feeding, medication for that eye infection, and eventually some basic training to socialize him properly." Thunder nodded, though part of him was wondering what he'd gotten himself into. "What do I need to do?" For the next hour, Dr. Chen walked him through the basics of caring for a miniature horse. Feeding schedules, medication administration, signs of illness to watch for, and the gradual process of rehabilitation that lay ahead. She left him with antibiotics for the eye infection, detailed feeding instructions, and her personal cell phone number. "Jackson," she said as she was packing up her equipment, "can I ask why you did this?" "Buying him, I mean. It's not exactly your usual style." Thunder was quiet for a long moment, watching the tiny horse nibble at a small pile of hay. How could he explain the feeling that had overwhelmed him in that auction barn? The recognition of something in the animal's eyes that mirrored his own sense of abandonment and defeat. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I saw something of myself in him." Dr. Chen nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Well, you've got a long road ahead of you both. But Jackson..." She paused at the barn door. "This might be the best thing you've ever done." After she left, Thunder sat in his camping chair and watched the tiny horse settle into the fresh straw bedding he'd spread in the stall. The animal seemed calmer now, less fearful, though it still startled at sudden sounds. Thunder found himself talking to it in a low, steady voice, the same tone he'd used to calm frightened soldiers during his military service. "Going to call you Pip," he said eventually. "Short for Pipsqueak. Seems to fit. Pip looked up at the sound of his voice, ears swiveling forward with what might have been interest. For the first time since Thunder had seen him in the auction ring, the tiny horse seemed to be paying attention to something other than his own survival. Thunder spent the night in the barn, dozing fitfully in the camping chair and waking every few hours to check on his unexpected companion. Each time he woke, he found Pip watching him with that intelligent, curious eye, as if trying to figure out what kind of human would sleep in a barn just to keep a lonely animal company. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Thunder realized that for the first time in years, he'd gone an entire night without thinking about the mistakes he'd made, the relationships he'd destroyed, or the growing sense that his life had lost all meaning. Instead, he'd focused entirely on the simple, immediate needs of another living being who depended on him for survival. It was a feeling he'd almost forgotten existed. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Thunder with its sense of purpose. Every morning at sunrise, he'd walk out to the barn with a cup of coffee and a small portion of hay for Pip. The tiny horse had learned to anticipate his arrival, often standing at the gate of his makeshift stall with what Thunder was learning to recognize as eager anticipation. "Morning, partner," Thunder would say, using the same greeting each day. Pip's ears would prick forward at the sound of his voice, and Thunder found himself looking forward to that small acknowledgement more than he cared to admit. Dr. Chen had been right about the recovery process being slow. Pip's weight gain was measured in ounces rather than pounds, and the eye infection required twice daily antibiotic treatments that tested both their patients. But gradually, incrementally, Thunder could see improvement. The tiny horse's coat began to show hints of shine, his movements became more confident, and his appetite grew stronger. Thunder found himself making frequent trips to the local library, something he hadn't done since high school. The librarian, a kind woman in her 60s named Mrs. Patterson, seemed delighted to help the intimidating biker research miniature horse care. She reserved books for him on equine nutrition, basic veterinary care, and even training techniques for small horses. "Never would have pegged you for a horse person." "Thunder," she said one afternoon, as she checked out a stack of books on animal psychology. "Neither did I," Thunder admitted. "But life has a way of surprising you." The Hells Angels brothers had mixed reactions to Thunder's new companion. When he'd returned the borrowed trailer to the auction grounds, word had spread quickly through the club about his unusual purchase. Some of the younger members found it amusing, making jokes about Thunder starting a petting zoo or planning to train the horse to ride on the back of his Harley. But the older members, men who'd ridden with Thunder for decades, recognized something different in him. Razor stopped by the property one evening and found Thunder in the barn, carefully brushing Pip's coat with a soft brush he'd bought specifically for the purpose. "You know, brother," Razor said, leaning against the stall door, "I've never seen you this focused on anything that wasn't made of steel and chrome." Thunder paused in his brushing, considering his response. "Maybe that was the problem all along." Razor nodded thoughtfully. "Catherine would have liked seeing this side of you." The mention of his late wife sent a familiar pang through Thunder's chest. But for the first time, it was accompanied by something like hope rather than pure regret. Catherine had always said he had a gentle heart buried under all the leather and attitude. Maybe she'd been right. The hand-carved wooden feed bucket was Thunder's first attempt at creating something purely functional and beautiful. He'd always been skilled with his hands, capable of rebuilding motorcycle engines and welding custom parts, but he'd never tried woodworking. Using tools borrowed from his neighbor, an elderly rancher named Pete, who seemed amused by Thunder's new hobby, he spent 3 evenings crafting a small bucket from a piece of oak he'd found in Pete's woodshed. The result was rough around the edges, with visible tool marks and an uneven finish, but it was unmistakably handmade with care. When Thunder filled it with oats and offered it to Pip for the first time, the tiny horse seemed to sense the significance of the gesture. He ate more slowly than usual, as if savoring not just the food, but the love that had gone into its presentation. "That's a fine piece of work," Pete commented when he stopped by to check on Thunder's progress. Pete was in his 70s, a man who'd spent his entire life working with horses and cattle. His approval meant more to Thunder than he expected. "Been thinking about making a halter next," Thunder said. "Something that fits him properly," Pete nodded approvingly. "Horse needs gear that's made for him, not just whatever you can find at the feed store. Shows you're taking this seriously." The breakthrough in their relationship came during Pip's 3rd week of recovery. Thunder had been sitting in his usual camping chair, reading one of the library books about horse psychology, when he heard an unusual sound from the stall. Pip was lying down, something he rarely did in Thunder's presence, and he was making a soft, contented sound that the book described as a sign of deep relaxation and trust. Thunder set down his book and approached the stall slowly. Pip looked up at him but didn't try to stand, a clear indication that he no longer saw Thunder as a potential threat. On impulse, Thunder opened the stall gate and stepped inside, moving with the deliberate calm he'd learned from years of approaching skittish motorcycles and wounded soldiers. To his amazement, Pip didn't move away. Instead, the tiny horse extended his neck and gently bumped Thunder's hand with his nose, a gesture that the books described as an invitation for contact. Thunder knelt in the straw and carefully placed his hand on Pip's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal's skin and the steady rhythm of his breathing. For 15 minutes, they stayed like that, man and horse sharing a wordless communication that transcended species. Thunder found himself telling Pip things he'd never spoken aloud, stories about his time in the military, his regrets about Catherine and Maya, his fears about growing old alone. Pip listened with the patient attention of a natural therapist, occasionally shifting position but never breaking the contact. When Thunder finally stood to leave, he felt lighter somehow, as if sharing those burdens with another living being had somehow diminished their weight. Pip watched him go with what Thunder was learning to recognize as affection, no longer the fearful, defeated creature from the auction, but a companion who had chosen to trust despite every reason to remain guarded. That night, Thunder called Dr. Chen to report on Pip's progress. The eye infection was clearing up, his weight was approaching normal, and his energy levels were noticeably higher. "Sounds like you're both doing well," Dr. Chen said, and Thunder could hear the smile in her voice. "Have you thought about what comes next?" "What do you mean?" "Well, Pip's going to be fully recovered soon. He's going to need more than just food and shelter. Miniature horses are intelligent, social animals. They need stimulation, exercise, maybe even some basic training. Have you considered what kind of life you want to give him?" Thunder hadn't thought that far ahead. His focus had been entirely on Pip's immediate health and safety. But as he considered Dr. Chen's question, he realized that somewhere along the way, his thinking had shifted from temporary rescue to permanent commitment. "I guess I'll figure it out as we go," he said. "Jackson?" Dr. Chen's voice was gentle. "You know this is the longest conversation we've ever had about anything other than motorcycles, right?" After they hung up, Thunder walked out to the barn for his evening check on Pip. The tiny horse was standing at the gate of his stall, as if he'd been waiting for Thunder's arrival. In the soft glow of the barn lights, Thunder could see how much Pip had changed in just 3 weeks. His coat was glossy, his eyes bright and alert, his posture confident and strong. But the bigger change, Thunder realized, was in himself. For the first time in years, he had something to look forward to beyond the next ride or the next drink. He had responsibility, purpose, and the beginning of something that felt suspiciously like hope. "Tomorrow we're going to start working on that halter," he told Pip, reaching through the gate to scratch behind the tiny horse's ears. "And maybe we'll take a walk around the property. See how you like being out in the sunshine?" Pip nickered softly in response, a sound that Thunder was learning to interpret as agreement. As he walked back to the house, Thunder found himself planning not just the next day, but the next week, the next month. For a man who'd spent most of his adult life living from moment to moment, it was a revelation to discover that the future could be something to anticipate rather than simply endure. The miniature leather harness took Thunder nearly a month to complete. Working in his garage during the cool evening hours, he applied the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him legendary among his brothers for custom motorcycle work. The leather was soft black cowhide, purchased from a specialty supplier in Los Angeles, and every stitch was done by hand using techniques he'd learned from an old-timer named Jimmy Two Knives who'd made leather goods for the club back in the 70s. The harness was designed specifically for Pip's small frame, with adjustable straps that would accommodate his continued weight gain and recovery. Thunder had studied photographs of show harnesses online, but he'd modified the design to be both functional and beautiful, incorporating subtle tooling patterns that echoed the designs on his own motorcycle saddlebags. When he finally fitted the harness on Pip for the first time, the transformation was remarkable. The tiny horse seemed to understand that this represented a new phase in their relationship, standing proudly as Thunder adjusted the straps and checked the fit. The black leather against Pip's now glossy coat created a striking contrast that spoke of partnership rather than ownership. "Look at you, partner," Thunder said, stepping back to admire his work. "Ready to see what's beyond these 5 acres?" Their first public appearance together was unplanned and accidental. Thunder had been leading Pip around the property on his new harness, both of them enjoying the spring morning sunshine, when Pete's granddaughter Emma came running across the field that separated their properties. She was 7 years old, with pigtails and gaps where her front teeth used to be, and she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Pip. "Grandpa Pete," she called out in a voice that could probably be heard in the next county. "Come see the tiny horse." Within minutes, Pete appeared with Emma's parents, who had been visiting for the weekend. Thunder found himself surrounded by a small crowd of admirers, all fascinated by Pip's unusual size and obvious intelligence. Emma was particularly enchanted, asking if she could pet him and marveling at how soft his nose was. "He's like a real horse, but pocket-sized," she declared, with the absolute certainty that only 7-year-olds possessed. Pip seemed to enjoy the attention, standing calmly while Emma stroked his neck and asked Thunder a rapid-fire series of questions about what he ate, where he slept, and whether he could jump over things like the horses she'd seen on television. Thunder found himself answering patiently, surprised by how much he'd learned about miniature horses in such a short time. "You should bring him to the farmer's market," Emma's mother suggested. "Kids would love to see him." The idea hadn't occurred to Thunder, but as he watched Pip interact with Emma, he realized that the tiny horse had a natural gift for connecting with people. There was something about his size and gentle demeanor that made him approachable in a way that full-sized horses weren't, especially for children. That afternoon, Thunder called Dr. Chen to discuss the possibility of taking Pip to public events. "It's a great idea," she said enthusiastically. "Miniature horses are often used as therapy animals because they're so good with people. Pip's certainly got the temperament for it, but you'll want to make sure he's properly socialized first. Start small, maybe just a few visits to places where he can meet different people in controlled situations." The socialization process became Thunder's new project. He started by taking Pip to the feed store, where the staff were delighted to meet the tiny horse who'd become something of a local legend. The store manager, a horse enthusiast herself, allowed Thunder to walk Pip through the aisles, letting him get used to different surfaces, sounds, and smells. Pip proved to be a natural ambassador. He was curious about everything, but never pushy or aggressive. He seemed to understand instinctively how to approach people, reading their body language and adjusting his behavior accordingly. With children, he was particularly gentle, lowering his head so they could reach him easily and standing perfectly still while small hands explored his mane and touched his soft. Thunder found himself developing a routine of evening visits to various locations around town. The library parking lot, where Mrs. Patterson would often come out to say hello. The grocery store, where Pip attracted small crowds of admirers. The park, where families gathered for weekend picnics. Each outing built Pip's confidence and reinforced the growing bond between them. Thunder learned to read his companion's signals, recognizing when Pip was tired or overwhelmed, and knowing when he was enjoying himself. They developed a communication system based on subtle cues and mutual trust that reminded Thunder of the best partnerships he'd experienced. During his military service, the breakthrough moment came during a visit to the children's ward at the regional hospital. Dr. Chen had suggested it after hearing about Pip's success with Emma and other children around town. She'd arranged for them to visit on a quiet afternoon, with just a few patients who were well enough to participate. Thunder had been nervous about the visit, worried that the hospital environment might be too overwhelming for Pip, or that the children might be too sick to enjoy the visit. But from the moment they walked into the ward, Pip seemed to understand exactly what was needed of him. He moved slowly and deliberately through the rooms, allowing children to pet him from their beds and wheelchairs. One little girl, who hadn't spoken since her accident 3 weeks earlier, whispered "pretty horse" while stroking Pip's mane. A boy, undergoing chemotherapy, laughed for the first time in days when Pip gently nuzzled his hand. Looking for treats, Thunder watched from the corner of the room, his throat tight with emotion he didn't quite know how to process. He'd spent 40 years cultivating a reputation for toughness, for being someone who could handle any physical challenge or confrontation. But watching Pip bring joy to sick children was teaching him about a different kind of strength, one that came from vulnerability and compassion rather than dominance and control. After the hospital visit, Thunder and Pip sat together in the parking lot, both of them emotionally drained but deeply satisfied. Thunder found himself talking to Pip about the children they'd just met, about the resilience he'd seen in their faces, and the privilege of being allowed to bring them even a moment of happiness. "You're good at this, partner," he said, scratching behind Pip's ears. "Better than me, that's for sure." But as they drove home in comfortable silence, Thunder realized that wasn't entirely true. He was learning things about himself that he'd never suspected, discovering capacities for patience and gentleness that years of motorcycle culture and military service had buried but not destroyed. Pip was teaching him not just how to care for another living being, but how to access parts of himself that he'd thought were lost forever. That evening, Thunder sat in his garage working on a new project. He'd started sketching designs for a custom trailer that would allow him to transport Pip more easily to their various appearances around town. But as he worked, his mind kept drifting to bigger possibilities. What if they could reach more children, visit more hospitals, bring joy to more people who needed it? For the first time since Catherine's death, Thunder found himself thinking not just about tomorrow or next week, but about the years ahead. He was 62 years old, supposedly past the age when men reinvented themselves completely. But sitting there in his garage, planning a future that involved healing rather than hurting, he felt younger and more hopeful than he had in decades. Pip watched from his temporary stall in the corner of the garage, munching contentedly on his evening hay. Sometimes Thunder caught him looking with what seemed like approval, as if the tiny horse understood exactly what kind of transformation was taking place and was quietly pleased with the progress they were making. Together, the idea for the cross-country journey came to Thunder while he was studying a road atlas in his kitchen one evening. He'd been planning their weekly route to various local appearances when his eyes wandered to the highways that stretched beyond California's borders. Interstate 40 ran all the way to North Carolina. Route 66 could take them through the heart of America. The possibilities seemed endless. Thunder had always been a wanderer at heart, but his previous travels had been about escape rather than purpose. This would be different. This would be about bringing Pip's gentle spirit to people across the country who might need the same kind of healing that Thunder had discovered in their partnership. The hand-marked road atlas became his obsession over the following weeks. Using a red pen, he traced potential routes that would take them through small towns and rural communities where a miniature horse and his biker companion might be welcome attractions. He researched children's hospitals, nursing homes, schools, and community centers along various routes, building a mental map of places where they might be able to make a difference. Dr. Chen found him bent over the atlas during one of her routine checkups on Pip, measuring distances and calculating travel times, planning a vacation. She asked, noting the intricate network of red lines covering the map. Something like that, Thunder replied. I've been thinking about taking Pip on the road. Show him some of the country, maybe visit some places where people could use a little cheering up. Dr. Chen studied the map with professional interest. It's not a bad idea, actually. Pip's young and healthy enough for travel, and he's certainly got the temperament for it. But you'd need to think about logistics, transportation, overnight accommodations, health certificates for crossing state lines. The transportation challenge proved to be the most complex part of the planning process. Thunder's usual mode of travel, Iron Thunder, wasn't designed for passengers of any species. He needed something that could safely transport Pip while still allowing them to maintain their mobile lifestyle. The solution came from an unexpected source. Diesel, the club member who'd originally mentioned the livestock auction, stopped by Thunder's garage one evening and found him sketching designs for a motorcycle-pulled trailer. You know, Diesel said, studying the drawings, my brother-in-law builds custom trailers up in Ventura. Does a lot of work for people who want to haul motorcycles or camping gear. Might be worth talking to him about something special for your little partner there. 2 weeks later, Thunder rode Iron Thunder north to Ventura to meet with Tommy Rodriguez, a master craftsman who specialized in lightweight, aerodynamic trailers designed for motorcycle touring. Tommy was intrigued by the challenge of creating a mobile home for a miniature horse. Never built anything quite like this, Tommy admitted, walking around Pip and taking measurements. But the principle's the same as any other custom job. Figure out what you need, then engineer a way to make it work. The trailer that Tommy designed was a masterpiece of form and function. Built on a lightweight aluminum frame with independent suspension, it was large enough for Pip to stand comfortably, but small enough to be pulled safely by a motorcycle. The interior was lined with padded walls and non-slip flooring, with windows that allowed Pip to see out and ventilation systems that ensured fresh air circulation. A small side compartment held feed, water and supplies, while the exterior was painted to match Iron Thunder's black and chrome color scheme. Looks like something out of a science fiction movie. Razor commented when Thunder brought the completed trailer to the clubhouse for its debut. But I'll be damned if it isn't the coolest thing I've ever seen. The Hells Angels' reaction to Thunder's travel plans was mixed, but generally supportive. Some of the younger members thought he'd lost his mind, planning to spend months on the road with a miniature horse when he could be riding free and unencumbered. But the older members, men who'd known Thunder for decades, recognized something they'd rarely seen in him before: genuine happiness. Catherine would have loved this bull, one of Thunder's oldest riding companions said quietly. She always said you had more heart than you knew what to do with. The test runs around the local area revealed both the potential and the challenges of their new travel arrangement. Pip adapted to the trailer with surprising ease, seeming to enjoy the movement and the changing scenery outside his windows. Thunder had to adjust his riding style to accommodate the additional weight and length. But Iron Thunder handled the load better than expected. Their first overnight trip was to a campground near Lake Tahoe, a 3-hour ride that would test both their endurance and their compatibility as traveling companions. Thunder had reserved a large campsite that could accommodate both the motorcycle and trailer, with enough space for Pip to get out and stretch his legs. Setting up camp became a carefully choreographed routine. Thunder would unhitch the trailer and set up a portable corral that allowed Pip to move around freely while remaining secure. A collapsible shelter provided shade and weather protection, while a portable water trough and feed stations ensured Pip's comfort. For Thunder, a simple tent and camping gear provided all the accommodation he needed. The other campers were fascinated by the unusual pair. Children gravitated toward Pip like iron filings to a magnet, while their parents peppered Thunder with questions about his background and travel plans. By the evening campfire, Thunder found himself surrounded by families eager to hear stories about how a Hell's Angel had ended up with a miniature horse. "We're planning to cross the country," Thunder explained to a retired couple from Oregon who'd been particularly interested in their story. "Visit children's hospitals, nursing homes, places where Pip can bring a little joy to people who need it." "That's beautiful," the woman said, her eyes soft with emotion. "The world needs more kindness like that." The success of the Lake Tahoe trip convinced Thunder that their cross-country plan was not only feasible, but necessary. They touched the lives of dozens of people in just one weekend, bringing smiles to children and wonder to adults who'd forgotten that magic could still exist in the world. Back home, Thunder began the detailed planning that would turn their dream into reality. He obtained health certificates for Pip, researched state regulations for transporting livestock, and compiled lists of potential stops along their chosen route. He arranged for mail forwarding, put his auto repair business in the hands of a trusted employee, and prepared Iron Thunder for the longest journey of both their lives. The night before their departure, Thunder sat in the barn with Pip, running through a mental checklist of everything they'd need for the road ahead. Emergency veterinary contacts in every state they'd pass through, weather contingencies for mountain passes and desert crossings, backup plans for mechanical failures or health emergencies. But beyond the practical considerations, Thunder found himself thinking about the deeper purpose of their journey. For 62 years, he'd lived primarily for himself, taking what he needed from the world and giving back only when it served his own interests. This trip represented something different, a chance to use the years he had left to bring healing and joy to others, to transform his reputation from someone who inspired fear to someone who inspired hope. "Tomorrow we start something new. A partner," he said to Pip, who was drowsing contentedly in his stall. "I don't know exactly where we're going or what we'll find out there, but I know we're going to make a difference." Pip opened one eye and regarded Thunder with the patient wisdom that had become his trademark. In that look, Thunder saw understanding, acceptance, and something that might have been excitement about the adventure ahead. They were ready for whatever the road might bring. The first 1,000 miles of their journey took them through the heart of the American Southwest, a landscape of endless horizons and small towns that seemed frozen in time. Thunder had chosen this route deliberately, wanting to visit communities that rarely saw outsiders, places where a miniature horse and his biker companion might be genuine novelties rather than just another roadside attraction. Their first major stop was Flagstaff, Arizona, where Thunder had arranged to visit the pediatric ward of the regional medical center. The Polaroid camera he'd bought specifically for the trip captured moment after moment of pure joy as children met Pip for the first time. A 6-year-old girl recovering from appendix surgery squealed with delight when Pip gently nuzzled her hand. Twin boys with broken legs from a bicycle accident competed to see who could get Pip to eat carrots from there. "Fingers, I've been working pediatrics for 15 years, the head nurse told Thunder as they prepared to leave. "I've never seen anything quite like the effect your little friend has on these kids. It's like he knows exactly what each one needs." Thunder tucked the nurse's business card into his wallet, alongside a growing collection of contacts from hospitals, schools, and community centers. Each stop was generating referrals to other places that could benefit from Pip's therapeutic presence, creating an informal network of people who understood the healing power of interspecies connection. The Polaroid photos became their traveling portfolio, a visual record of lives touched and spirits lifted. Thunder kept them in a special album that he'd show to skeptical administrators or curious reporters, letting the images speak for themselves. An elderly man in a nursing home, his face lit up with wonder as he stroked Pip's mane. A classroom full of special needs children, all focused intently on the tiny horse standing patiently in their midst. A group of veterans at a VA hospital, tough men with haunted eyes, finding peace in Pip's gentle presence. In Gallup, New Mexico, they encountered their first significant media attention. A local newspaper reporter, intrigued by reports of a Hell's Angel traveling with a miniature therapy horse, tracked them down at a campground outside town. The resulting article, titled "Unlikely Angels, Biker and Horse Bring Hope to the Road," was picked up by the Associated Press and distributed nationally. "I never expected to be famous," Thunder told the reporter, standing beside Pip in the golden light of a desert sunset. "This isn't about us. It's about what happens when people open their hearts to possibility." The newspaper article brought unexpected consequences. Suddenly, people in towns ahead of their planned route were calling to request visits. Television stations wanted interviews. Social media, a phenomenon Thunder barely understood, was buzzing with photos and videos of their appearances. But it was the personal encounters that mattered most to Thunder. In Amarillo, Texas, they visited a children's cancer ward, where a 9-year-old boy named Marcus was undergoing his final rounds of chemotherapy. Marcus had been fascinated by horses his entire life, but had never been strong enough to visit a stable or riding facility. When Pip walked into Marcus's room, the transformation was immediate. The pale, withdrawn child suddenly came alive, asking questions about Pip's care and feeding, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm that his parents hadn't seen in months. For an hour, Marcus forgot about his illness and lost himself in the simple joy of connecting with another living being who asked nothing of him except acceptance. "You gave my son something I couldn't," Marcus's father said as Thunder and Pip prepared to leave. "You gave him hope." Thunder carried that conversation with him as they rolled across the Texas Panhandle, the endless prairie stretching out on both sides of the highway. The weight of responsibility was growing heavier with each mile, each life they touched. He'd started this journey thinking about his own need for purpose and meaning, but it was becoming clear that something much larger was developing. In Oklahoma City, they were met by a delegation from the mayor's office and a crowd of media representatives. Their reputation had preceded them, and what was supposed to be a quiet visit to a local elementary school had turned into a city-wide event. Thunder found himself giving impromptu interviews while Pip patiently posed for photographers and television cameras. "What's your ultimate goal with this journey?" a reporter from the local CBS affiliate asked, microphone extended toward Thunder's leather-clad figure. Thunder considered the question carefully. "I guess it's to prove that healing can come from the most unexpected places. That sometimes what looks like weakness, like gentleness, is actually the strongest force in the world." The reporter followed up with questions about Thunder's background, his military service, his involvement with the Hells Angels. Thunder answered honestly, but kept steering the conversation back to Pip and the people they were meeting along the way. This wasn't about him, he insisted. It was about connection, compassion, and the universal human need for hope. That evening, camping in a state park outside Oklahoma City, Thunder called Dr. Chen to update her on their progress. The veterinarian was delighted to hear that Pip was thriving on the road, maintaining his health despite the constant travel and public appearances. "You know, Jackson," she said, "when you first called me about that miniature horse, I thought you might be having some kind of midlife crisis. I never imagined it would turn into something like this." "Neither did I," Thunder admitted, watching Pip graze peacefully in the portable corral. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things in life are the ones we never see coming." Their route through Arkansas and Tennessee took them through some of the most beautiful country Thunder had ever seen. Rolling hills covered with spring flowers and forests that seemed to stretch forever. But it was the people they met that made the deepest impression. Rural communities that welcomed them with genuine warmth and curiosity. Small-town newspapers that wrote thoughtful articles about their mission. Children who would remember meeting Pip for the rest of their lives. In Memphis, they visited Graceland, where Pip posed for photos with Elvis impersonators and charmed tourists from around the world. The contrast was surreal, Thunder thought, between the commercial spectacle of celebrity worship and the authentic connections they were making everywhere they stopped. But it was a quiet moment at a truck stop outside Nashville that captured the true spirit of their journey. An elderly trucker, weathered by decades on the road, approached their campsite with obvious curiosity about the unusual pair. When Thunder invited him to meet Pip, the man's tough exterior melted away completely. "Haven't seen anything this pure in 30 years of driving," the trucker said, his voice thick with emotion as Pip nuzzled his calloused hand. "Makes me remember why I used to love this job, back when it was about the journey instead of just the destination." Thunder understood exactly what the man meant. This trip was changing him in ways he was still discovering, opening parts of his heart that had been closed for decades. Every mile, every encounter, every photograph in their growing album was proof that transformation was possible at any age. That purpose could be found in the most unlikely circumstances. As they prepared for the next phase of their journey, Thunder felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. They were making a difference, one person at a time, one smile at a time, one moment of connection at a time. It wasn't the kind of legacy he'd ever imagined for himself, but it was better than anything he could have planned. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning outside Knoxville, Tennessee. Thunder had been grooming Pip in their campsite, enjoying the peaceful routine that had become second nature over the past 6 weeks on the road, when his cell phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Is this Jackson Murphy?" The voice was female, professional, with an undertone of barely controlled emotion. "This is Thunder," he replied automatically, using the name that had defined him for so long that his given name sounded foreign. "Thunder. Right." There was a pause, and when the voice continued, it carried a familiar cadence that made Thunder's chest tighten. "This is Maya Robinson. I used to be Maya Murphy. Before Mom remarried." Thunder's hand went slack, nearly dropping the phone. He hadn't heard his daughter's voice in over 3 years, not since their last awkward conversation on her birthday, when he'd called an hour late, and she'd been polite but distant. Now suddenly, she was calling him Maya. He said her name like a prayer, like a question, like an apology, all rolled into one. "How did you get this number?" "I saw the news coverage. There was a story on CNN about a Hell's Angel traveling the country with a miniature therapy horse. The reporter said your name was Jackson Murphy, but you went by Thunder. I thought it might be you, but I wasn't sure until I saw the photograph." Thunder looked down at the military dog tags he'd pulled from his dresser drawer that morning, the same ones he'd worn during Desert Storm and kept hidden in a box for 30 years. For some reason he couldn't explain, he'd started wearing them again during their journey, tucked beneath his leather jacket where no one could see them. Maybe it was being around so many veterans in the hospitals they visited. Maybe it was the growing sense that he was finally becoming the man he'd always been meant to be. "You've been watching the news about us?" Thunder asked, settling onto a picnic table bench. Bibb looked up from his grazing, sensing the change in Thunder's emotional state. "I've been watching everything I can find. The newspaper articles, the television interviews, the videos people post online of your visits to hospitals and schools." Maya's voice was softer now, less guarded. "Dad, I had no idea you were capable of something like this." The word Dad hit Thunder like a physical blow. Maya hadn't called him that since she was 12 years old, when the divorce had finalized and she'd started calling him by his first name during their increasingly rare visits. "I didn't know either," Thunder admitted. "It just sort of happened. Pip needed someone and I needed something to care about besides myself." "Pip, that's his name." There was warmth in Maya's voice now, the kind of warmth Thunder remembered from when she was small and would run to greet him when he came home from work. Short for Pipsqueak. "He was in pretty rough shape when I got him. Reminded me of myself, I guess." Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Thunder could hear voices in the background. The kind of institutional sounds that he'd learned to associate with hospitals during their visits. "Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to reach you for months, but I didn't know how. I called the old numbers I had, but they were disconnected. I even called some of your Hell's Angels friends, but they said you'd been keeping to yourself." Thunder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Are you okay?" The endearment slipped out naturally, a remnant from when Maya was little and would climb onto his lap to have him read her bedtime stories. He'd forgotten he used to call her that, forgotten the man he'd been before grief and guilt had turned him into someone who ran from emotional connection. "I'm sick, Dad, really sick. I have ovarian cancer, stage 3. I've been in treatment for 8 months now, and it's not going well." The world seemed to tilt around Thunder. He gripped the edge of the picnic table, his knuckles white with tension. Pip moved closer, pressing his small body against Thunder's leg, in a gesture of comfort that the tiny horse had perfected during their hospital visits. "Where are you?" Thunder managed to ask. "What can I do?" "Do you need money? Do you need me to come there?" "I'm in Portland, at OHSU, the cancer center. And Dad, I do need you to come. Not for money or anything practical. I just need my father." Thunder was already standing, his mind racing through the logistics of getting from Tennessee to Oregon as quickly as possible. "I'll leave right now. I can be there in 3 days, maybe 2 if I push it." "Don't rush," Maya said, and there was something in her voice that made Thunder's blood run cold. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. The doctors say I have time. Weeks, maybe a couple of months, if the next round of treatment works. But Dad, I need you to know something. Watching those news stories, seeing what you're doing with Pip, it's made me proud for the first time in years. It's made me remember the father I used to love before everything fell apart." Thunder felt tears on his cheeks, the first he'd shed since Catherine's funeral. "Maya, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not being there when you needed me. For not being the father you deserved. For missing so much of your life. I know you are, and I forgive you. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I don't want you to come here out of guilt or obligation. I want you to come because you choose to, because you want to be part of whatever time I have left. Of course I want to be there. You're my daughter. You're the most important thing in the world to me." "Then prove it," Maya said gently. "Come to Portland, but bring Pip with you. The children's ward here could use some joy, and I'd like to meet the little horse who helped my father find his heart again." After they hung up, Thunder sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. Pip stayed close, occasionally bumping his nose against Thunder's hand in a gesture of comfort. The tiny horse seemed to understand that their world had just shifted dramatically, that the journey they'd been on had suddenly taken on a much more urgent and personal dimension. Thunder thought about the man he'd been when Maya was growing up, so consumed with proving his toughness and independence that he'd forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to admit fear or weakness or love. He'd been present physically but absent emotionally. A father who provided financial support but withheld the connection his daughter had needed most. But the man sitting in that campsite in Tennessee was different from the one who'd failed Maya during her childhood. This man had learned patience from caring for an injured animal. He'd discovered empathy through watching Pip heal sick children. He'd found purpose in service to others, rather than service to his own ego. Maybe it was too late to be the father Maya had needed 20 years ago. But it wasn't too late to be the father she needed now. Thunder pulled out his road atlas and began tracing a new route, one that would take them west as quickly as possible, while still allowing for the stops and visits they'd committed to along the way. They would honor their obligations to the hospitals and schools that were expecting them, but their ultimate destination was clear. Portland, his daughter, and the chance to prove that transformation was possible, even in the face of loss. That love could survive decades of neglect and bloom again, when given the opportunity. As he packed up their campsite with practiced efficiency, Thunder found himself talking to Pip about the journey ahead, about the young woman they were going to meet, and the healing they might be able to bring to her final months. "She's going to love you, partner," he said, loading Pip into the trailer with extra care. "And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll be able to give her something worth holding on to when everything else starts slipping away." The Oregon Health and Science University Hospital sat perched on a hill overlooking Portland like a modern fortress against disease and despair. Thunder had never felt smaller than he did walking through those glass doors, Pip's lead rope in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. The flowers had been an impulsive purchase at a roadside stand, chosen because he remembered Maya loving their bright faces when she was 7 years old, and they'd visited a sunflower farm outside Bakersfield. The hospital bracelet around Maya's thin wrist read, "Robinson, Maya C., room 847, in stark black letters. Thunder stared at it as he approached her bed, this simple piece of plastic that reduced his daughter's entire existence to a room number and a surname that wasn't his. She was asleep when he first saw her, her face pale and drawn in a way that made her look both older and younger than her 28 years. Thunder had prepared himself for this moment during the 3-day drive from Tennessee, but the reality was still a shock. Maya had always been petite like her mother, but now she seemed almost fragile, diminished by the aggressive treatments that were supposed to save her life. Her dark hair, once thick and lustrous, was hidden beneath a colorful scarf that couldn't quite disguise the effects of chemotherapy. "Dad," Maya's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Thunder's leather-clad figure with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "You came? You really came?" "Of course I came," Thunder said, his voice rougher than he intended. He set the sunflowers on her bedside table and pulled a chair close to her bed. "I should have come years ago." Maya's smile was weaker than he remembered, but no less radiant. "Better late than never, right? And you brought Pip. Where is he?" "Downstairs with Dr. Patterson, the pediatric coordinator. We had to get special permission for him to visit, and they want to make sure he's comfortable with the hospital environment before we bring him up here." "Smart. Hospitals can be overwhelming." Maya shifted in her bed, wincing slightly at the movement. "Dad, I need to tell you something. About why I called. About why I've been following your story so closely." Thunder leaned forward, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "I've been angry with you for so long," Maya continued. "Angry about the divorce, about you not being there when I graduated college, when I got my first job, when I bought my house. Angry that you chose the Hells Angels over your own family." Thunder started to speak, but Maya held up her free hand. "But then I got sick, and suddenly all that anger seemed pointless. I realized I was spending what might be my last months on Earth, holding grudges against the only parent I have left. And then I saw those news stories about you and Pip, and I saw something I'd never seen before." "What did you see?" "I saw my father being the man Mom always said you could be. Gentle, caring, using your strength to protect something smaller and weaker than yourself. I saw the father I'd always hoped you might become." Thunder felt the familiar tightness in his throat that had been plaguing him since Maya's phone call. "I'm not sure I'm that man yet, sweetheart. I'm still figuring it out as I go. That's what makes it beautiful, Dad. You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're actually becoming something better." For some reason he couldn't explain, he'd started wearing them again during their journey, tucked beneath his leather jacket where no one could see them. Maybe it was being around so many veterans in the hospitals they visited. Maybe it was the growing sense that he was finally becoming the man he'd always been meant to be. "You've been watching the news about us?" Thunder asked, settling onto a picnic table bench. Pip looked up from his grazing, sensing the change in Thunder's emotional state. "I've been watching everything I can find. The newspaper articles, the television interviews, the videos people post online of your visits to hospitals and schools." Maya's voice was softer now, less guarded. "Dad, I had no idea you were capable of something like this." The word "Dad" hit Thunder like a physical blow. Maya hadn't called him that since she was 12 years old. When the divorce had finalized and she'd started calling him by his first name during their increasingly rare visits. "I didn't know either," Thunder admitted. "It just sort of happened. Pip needed someone and I needed something to care about besides myself. Pip, that's his name." There was warmth in Maya's voice now, the kind of warmth Thunder remembered from when she was small and would run to greet him when he came home from work. Short for Pipsqueak. He was in pretty rough shape when I got him. Reminded me of myself, I guess. Maya was quiet for a long moment, and Thunder could hear voices in the background. The kind of institutional sounds that he'd learned to associate with hospitals during their visits. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to reach you for months, but I didn't know how. I called the old numbers I had, but they were disconnected. I even called some of your Hell's Angels friends, but they said you'd been keeping to yourself. Thunder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What is it, sweetheart? Are you okay? The endearment slipped out naturally, a remnant from when Maya was little and would climb onto his lap to have him read her bedtime stories. He'd forgotten he used to call her that, forgotten the man he'd been before grief and guilt had turned him into someone who ran from emotional connection. I'm sick, Dad, really sick. I have ovarian cancer stage 3. I've been in treatment for 8 months now, and it's not going well. The world seemed to tilt around Thunder. He gripped the edge of the picnic table, his knuckles white with tension. Pip moved closer, pressing his small body against Thunder's leg in a gesture of comfort that the tiny horse had perfected during their hospital visits. Where are you? Thunder managed to ask. What can I do? Do you need money? Do you need me to come there? I'm in Portland, at OHSU, the cancer center. And Dad, I do need you to come, not for money or anything practical. I just need my father. Thunder was already standing, his mind racing through the logistics of getting from Tennessee to Oregon as quickly as possible. I'll leave right now. I can be there in 3 days, maybe 2 if I push it. Don't rush, Maya said, and there was something in her voice that made Thunder's blood run cold. I'm not going anywhere. The doctors say I have time. Weeks, maybe a couple of months if the next round of treatment works. But Dad, I need you to know something. Watching those news stories, seeing what you're doing with Pip, it's made me proud for the first time in years. It's made me remember the father I used to love before everything fell apart. Thunder felt tears on his cheeks, the first he'd shed since Catherine's funeral. Maya, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not being there when you needed me. For not being the father you deserved. For missing so much of your life. I know you are. And I forgive you. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I don't want you to come here out of guilt or obligation. I want you to come because you choose to, because you want to be part of whatever time I have left. Of course I want to be there. You're my daughter. You're the most important thing in the world to me. Then prove it, Maya said gently. Come to Portland, but bring Pip with you. The children's ward here could use some joy. And I'd like to meet the little horse who helped my father find his heart again. After they hung up, Thunder sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. Pip stayed close, occasionally bumping his nose against Thunder's hand in a gesture of comfort. The tiny horse seemed to understand that their world had just shifted dramatically, that the journey they'd been on had suddenly taken on a much more urgent and personal dimension. Thunder thought about the man he'd been when Maya was growing up, so consumed with proving his toughness and independence that he'd forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to admit fear or weakness or love. He'd been present physically but absent emotionally, a father who provided financial support but withheld the connection his daughter had needed most. But the man, sitting in that campsite in Tennessee, was different from the one who'd failed Maya during her childhood. This man had learned patience from caring for an injured animal. He'd discovered empathy through watching Pip heal sick children. He'd found purpose in service to others rather than service to his own ego. Maybe it was too late to be the father Maya had needed 20 years ago. But it wasn't too late to be the father she needed now. Thunder pulled out his road atlas and began tracing a new route, one that would take them west as quickly as possible, while still allowing for the stops and visits they'd committed to along the way. They would honor their obligations to the hospitals and schools that were expecting them, but their ultimate destination was clear. Portland, his daughter, and the chance to prove that transformation was possible even in the face of loss, that love could survive decades of neglect and bloom again when given the opportunity, As he packed up their campsite with practiced efficiency, Thunder found himself talking to Pip about the journey ahead, about the young woman they were going to meet, and the healing they might be able to bring to her final months. "She's going to love you, partner," he said, loading Pip into the trailer with extra care. "And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll be able to give her something worth holding on to when everything else starts slipping away." The Oregon Health and Science University Hospital sat perched on a hill overlooking Portland like a modern fortress against disease and despair. Thunder had never felt smaller than he did walking through those glass doors, Pip's lead rope in one hand and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. The flowers had been an impulsive purchase at a roadside stand, chosen because he remembered Maya loving their bright faces when she was 7 years old, and they'd visited a sunflower farm outside Bakersfield. The hospital bracelet around Maya's thin wrist read, "Robinson, Maya C, room 847" in stark black letters. Thunder stared at it as he approached her bed, this simple piece of plastic that reduced his daughter's entire existence to a room number and a surname that wasn't his. She was asleep when he first saw her, her face pale and drawn, in a way that made her look both older and younger than her 28 years. Thunder had prepared himself for this moment during the 3-day drive from Tennessee, but the reality was still a shock. Maya had always been petite like her mother, but now she seemed almost fragile, diminished by the aggressive treatments that were supposed to save her life. Her dark hair, once thick and lustrous, was hidden beneath a colorful scarf that couldn't quite disguise the effects of chemotherapy. "Dad?" Maya's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Thunder's leather-clad figure with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "You came. You really came." "Of course I came," Thunder said, his voice rougher than he intended. He set the sunflowers on her bedside table and pulled a chair close to her bed. "I should have come years ago." Maya's smile was weaker than he remembered, but no less radiant. "Better late than never, right? And you brought Pip. Where is he?" "Downstairs with Dr. Patterson, the pediatric coordinator. We had to get special permission for him to visit, and they want to make sure he's comfortable with the hospital environment before we bring him up here." "Smart. Hospitals can be overwhelming." Maya shifted in her bed, wincing slightly at the movement. "Dad, I need to tell you something. About why I called, about why I've been following your story so closely." Thunder leaned forward, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "I've been angry with you for so long," Maya continued. "Angry about the divorce, about you not being there when I graduated college, when I got my first job, when I bought my house. Angry that you chose the Hell's Angels over your own family." Thunder started to speak, but Maya held up her free hand. "But then I got sick, and suddenly all that anger seemed pointless. I realized I was spending what might be my last months on Earth, holding grudges against the only parent I have left. And then I saw those news stories about you and Pip, and I saw something I'd never seen before." "What did you see?" "I saw my father being the man Mom always said you could be. Gentle, caring, using your strength to protect something smaller and weaker than yourself. I saw the father I'd always hoped you might become." Thunder felt the familiar tightness in his throat that had been plaguing him since Maya's phone call. "I'm not sure I'm that man yet, sweetheart. I'm still figuring it out as I go. That's what makes it beautiful, Dad. You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're actually becoming something better." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Patterson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, peered around the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a certain miniature horse downstairs who's been asking about his favorite person," she said with a smile. "Well, not asking exactly, but he's been very insistent about something." Maya's face lit up with an excitement Thunder hadn't seen since she was a child. "Can we bring him up? Is that allowed?" "Special circumstances call for special measures," Dr. Patterson replied. "The whole pediatric ward is buzzing with excitement about your famous visitors. I think they're more interested in meeting Pip than most of the celebrities who visited over the years." 20 minutes later, Thunder was leading Pip through the hospital corridors. past rooms full of children and families who pressed against their doorways for a glimpse of the tiny horse. Pip moved with his characteristic calm confidence, his hooves clicking softly on the polished floors as he followed Thunder toward Maya's room. When they entered room 847, Pip immediately focused on Maya with the same intuitive understanding he'd shown with countless other patients. He approached her bed slowly, his head lowered in a gesture of respect and gentleness that never failed to amaze Thunder. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, reaching out to touch Pip's soft nose. "He's even more beautiful than in the pictures. And so small, he's like a living teddy bear." Pip stood perfectly still as Maya stroked his face and neck, seeming to understand that this was someone who needed extra care and tenderness. When Maya began to cry, soft tears of joy and wonder, Pip moved closer to the bed, allowing her to bury her face in his mane. "I can't believe this is real," Maya said through her tears. "I can't believe my tough guy father travels the country with a therapy horse, bringing joy to sick people. It's like something out of a fairy tale." "Sometimes fairy tales come true," Thunder said, watching the interaction between his daughter and his four-legged partner. "Sometimes they just take a little longer than we expect." Over the next hour, Maya told Thunder about her life, her career as an architect, her marriage to a fellow architect named David, who was currently in the hospital cafeteria, giving them some private time. She showed him photographs on her phone of the house they'd designed together, the gardens she'd planted, the life she'd built in Portland. "We've been trying to have children," Maya said quietly. "We've been through 3 rounds of IVF, but then the cancer diagnosis changed everything. David wants to keep trying after I'm in remission, but the doctors aren't very optimistic about remission." Thunder felt the weight of all the moments he'd missed. All the conversations they should have had, all the support he should have provided during the difficult years when Maya was building her adult life. But dwelling on regret wouldn't help her now. "What do you need from me?" Thunder asked. "What can Pip and I do to make this easier?" Maya's smile was radiant despite her obvious exhaustion. "Just be here, both of you. I know you can't stay forever, but for whatever time we have, I want my father back. The real one. Not the angry stranger who used to visit on birthdays and holidays." Thunder squeezed her hand. "You've got him, sweetheart, for as long as you need him." That evening, Thunder set up their mobile camp in a KOA campground 20 minutes from the hospital. As he groomed Pip and prepared their simple dinner, he found himself processing the emotional whiplash of the day. The joy of reconnecting with Maya was tempered by the devastating reality of her condition. The precious nature of whatever time they had left together. Pip seemed to sense Thunder's emotional turmoil, staying closer than usual and accepting the extra attention Thunder lavished on him. They'd been through so much together over the past months, traveled thousands of miles and touched hundreds of lives. But this felt like the most important stop on their journey, the place where all their practice at healing and connection would be put to its ultimate test. Thunder pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages that had been accumulating during their hospital visit. Requests for appearances, interview opportunities, invitations to events across the country. All of it would have to wait. His daughter needed him, and for the first time in his adult life. Nothing else mattered more than being the father she deserved. The children's drawing that changed everything was created by a 6-year-old boy named Alex Robinson, Maya's son. Thunder had been sitting in Maya's hospital room, reading to her from a magazine while she dozed fitfully between treatments, when a small face appeared around the doorframe. The boy had his mother's dark eyes and delicate features, but there was something unmistakably familiar about his stubborn chin and the way he tilted his head when he was curious. "Mama," Alex whispered, clutching a piece of construction paper covered in crayon marks. "Is that Pip? The horse from the TV?" Thunder's heart stopped. In all their conversations over the past 3 days, Maya had mentioned David, her husband, but she'd never said anything about children. Thunder stared at the little boy, trying to process the reality that he was looking at his grandson for the first time. "Come here, sweetheart," Maya said, waking from her nap and extending her arms toward Alex. "I want you to meet some very special people." Alex approached cautiously, his eyes fixed on Pip, who was lying contentedly on a special mat that Dr. Patterson had provided for extended visits. The tiny horse opened one eye and regarded the boy with the same gentle patience he showed all children. "Alex, this is your grandfather, Jackson, and this is Pip, his therapy horse." The word grandfather hit Thunder like a physical blow. He'd been a grandfather for 6 years and hadn't even known it. The magnitude of what he'd missed, what Maya had protected him from knowing, was overwhelming. "You're my grandpa?" Alex asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "Mama showed me pictures of you on the computer. You ride motorcycles and help sick kids." Thunder knelt down to Alex's eye level, his leather jacket creaking softly. "That's right, buddy. And you drew a picture?" Alex nodded enthusiastically and held up his artwork. It was a crayon drawing of a large figure in black leather standing next to a tiny horse with stick figures of children around them. At the bottom, in careful 6-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My grandpa and Pip help people feel better. This is the most beautiful picture I've ever seen," Thunder said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I keep it?" Alex beamed and handed over the drawing. "I made it for you. Daddy said you might like it." Over the following days, Thunder learned about the grandson he'd never known existed. Alex was bright and curious, with his mother's artistic sensibilities and an insatiable appetite for stories about motorcycles and horses. He'd been living with his father since Maya's hospitalization had intensified, visiting her every day after school and on weekends. Thunder found himself taking on responsibilities he'd never imagined. When David needed to attend meetings with doctors or handle insurance paperwork, Thunder would stay with Alex, walking with him through the hospital's healing gardens or sitting in the children's playroom while Pip entertained young patients. "Tell me about when you were in the army," Alex would say, climbing onto Thunder's lap with the casual affection that only children possessed. "Were you scared of the bad guys?" These conversations forced Thunder to confront parts of his past that he'd buried for decades. But speaking to Alex, he found himself able to discuss his military service in terms of protecting people and serving something larger than himself, rather than the trauma and violence that had defined those memories for so long. "Sometimes I was scared," Thunder admitted. "But being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you careful, and careful people are better at protecting the people they love." Maya watched these interactions with obvious joy, despite her declining strength. The latest round of chemotherapy hadn't been successful, and the oncology team was beginning to discuss palliative care options. Time was becoming precious in a way that made every moment feel both significant and fragile. "He adores you," Maya told Thunder one afternoon as they watched Alex attempt to teach Pip to play fetch in the hospital's courtyard. "I was worried about introducing you two, afraid that you might not know how to connect with a child. But you're a natural grandfather." "I had a good teacher," Thunder replied, watching Alex's patient persistence as he tried to explain the rules of fetch to a horse. "You turned out to be an amazing mother, despite having me as an example of what not to do." "You weren't all bad, Dad. I remember the good times too. The motorcycle rides when I was little, sitting in front of you on the seat while we rode around the neighborhood. The way you used to read me bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters. You had it in you all along. You just forgot how to let it out." Thunder thought about the man he'd been during Maya's childhood, so focused on maintaining his tough exterior that he'd forgotten how to be vulnerable with the people who mattered most. Catherine had tried to tell him that his softness was a strength, not a weakness, but he'd been too proud and too scared to listen. But Alex had no such barriers. To him, Thunder was simply Grandpa, a larger-than-life figure who rode motorcycles and traveled with a magical tiny horse. Alex didn't see the Hells Angels patches or the intimidating leather jacket. He saw someone who was willing to sit on the floor and color pictures, who would read the same story 3 times in a row, who treated his beloved horse with the same gentle care that Alex was learning to show all living things. The therapeutic effect of their presence extended beyond Maya's room. Pip had become the unofficial mascot of the pediatric wing, making daily rounds to visit children who were too sick to leave their beds. Thunder found himself serving as an informal counselor to other families dealing with childhood illnesses. His own experience with Maya's diagnosis giving him credibility with parents who were struggling to maintain hope. "My daughter has leukemia," a father named Robert confided to Thunder one evening in the family lounge. "She's 8 years old, and she keeps asking me if she's going to die. I don't know what to tell her." Thunder thought about his own journey from despair to hope, about the healing power of honest connection and the importance of being present rather than trying to fix everything. "Tell her the truth in a way she can understand," Thunder suggested. "That you don't know what's going to happen, but that you're going to be with her every step of the way. Kids can handle uncertainty better than adults sometimes, as long as they know they're not alone." These conversations reminded Thunder of the responsibility that came with their growing reputation. They weren't just entertainers or curiosities. They were symbols of hope for people who desperately needed to believe that healing was possible, that love could triumph over loss, that even in the darkest circumstances, beauty and connection could still flourish. One evening, as Thunder was saying goodnight to Alex before David took him home, the little boy wrapped his arms around Thunder's neck in a fierce hug. "Grandpa, will you still visit me after Mama goes to heaven?" Alex asked with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often showed toward mortality. Thunder's throat tightened, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "Of course I will, buddy. You're my grandson, and that means we're family forever. Distance doesn't change that, and neither does anything else." Alex nodded solemnly and handed Thunder another drawing, this one showing the two of them riding Iron Thunder together, with Pip running alongside. "This is for when I'm big enough to ride on your motorcycle." That night, Thunder sat in his trailer at the Kiowa campground, surrounded by Alex's artwork and overwhelmed by the profound responsibility of being needed by someone so small and innocent. He thought about the legacy he was building, not just through his travels with Pip, but through his relationship with Maya and Alex. For 62 years, he'd lived primarily for himself. But these past weeks in Portland had shown him what it meant to live for other people, to find purpose in service rather than self-interest. It was a lesson that was coming almost too late, but perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the best lessons were the ones that forced you to change everything about how you understood yourself and your place in the world. The childhood photograph that Maya gave him was taken when she was 8 years old, on one of their rare father-daughter outings to a county fair. In the picture, Maya sat on Thunder's shoulders, her small hands gripping his leather jacket while they both grinned at Catherine behind the camera. Thunder had forgotten that day completely until Maya pulled the photo from her purse during one of their quiet afternoons together. "Mom kept all the pictures," Maya said, tracing the edges of the faded photograph with her finger. "Even after the divorce, even after she remarried Robert. She said someday I might want to remember the good times instead of just the difficult ones." Thunder studied the image, remembering the weight of Maya's small body on his shoulders, the way she'd squealed with delight when they'd ridden the Ferris wheel together. He'd been so young then, barely 30, still learning how to balance his identity as a Hell's Angel with his responsibilities as a father and husband. "I was terrified that day," Thunder admitted. "Not of the rides or the crowds, but of you. Of being responsible for someone so small and trusting. I didn't know how to be gentle." "But you were gentle," Maya said. "When it mattered, when I needed you to be, you always found a way to be the father I needed. It just took me getting sick to remember that." Maya had been living with David in a craftsman-style house in the Hawthorne neighborhood, a place filled with the evidence of their life together. Books on architecture and design, photographs from their travels, sketches and blueprints scattered across a desk in what had once been Maya's home office. Thunder spent hours there during Maya's better days, learning about the woman his daughter had become. "We designed this house ourselves," Maya told him as they sat in the sun-drenched living room, Pip dozing contentedly on a blanket near the fireplace. "It was our first major project as a team back when we were still in graduate school. We bought the lot with money we'd saved for 3 years, and we did most of the work ourselves." Thunder could see Maya's artistic vision in every detail. The way the windows captured the morning light, the built-in bookshelves that maximize storage without overwhelming the space, the garden visible through the kitchen window, where vegetables grew alongside flowers in carefully planned harmony. "It's beautiful," Thunder said, meaning it. "You and David created something really special here." David Robinson was a thoughtful man in his early 30s, soft-spoken where Thunder was gruff, intellectual where Thunder was instinctive. Thunder had expected to feel awkward around his son-in-law, uncertain how to connect with someone whose life experiences were so different from his own. But David's love for Maya and Alex created common ground that transcended their superficial differences. "I want to thank you for coming," David said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, Alex having fallen asleep on the couch next to Pip. "Maya's been happier these past few weeks than she's been since her diagnosis. Having you here, knowing that you two have reconnected, it means everything to her." Thunder dried dishes with careful attention, still getting used to domestic routines he'd avoided for most of his adult life. "I should have been here all along. I should have been part of her life, part of Alex's life." "You're here now," David replied simply. "That's what matters." The Hells Angels visited on a weekend in early November, a delegation of Thunder's oldest brothers who had driven up from California to check on him and meet the family he'd been telling them about. Razor led the group, along with Bull, Diesel, and 3 other members who had known Thunder for more than 20 years. Maya was having a good day, alert and energetic enough to sit up in bed and receive visitors. She charmed Thunder's brothers with her direct questions about motorcycle culture and her obvious pride in her father's transformation. Alex was fascinated by the leather jackets and patches, asking detailed questions about the meaning of various symbols and insignia. "Your grandpa's something special," Razor told Alex, ruffling the boy's hair with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who'd only seen the club president's intimidating exterior. "We've been riding together for 25 years, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been since he found Pip. Pip's the best horse in the whole world," Alex declared with 6-year-old certainty. "He helps sick kids feel better, and he helped Grandpa learn how to be nice." The visit was a revelation for Thunder, showing him how his 2 worlds could coexist rather than compete. His Hells Angels family accepted Maya and Alex without reservation, treating them with the same protective loyalty they'd always shown Thunder. Maya, meanwhile, seemed genuinely interested in this part of Thunder's life, asking thoughtful questions about the brotherhood and the values that held the club together. "I always thought the Hells Angels were just about rebellion and violence," Maya told Razor during one of their conversations. "But watching you all with Alex, seeing how much you obviously care about each other, I'm starting to understand that it's really about family. Different kind of family than most people are used to," Razor acknowledged. "But family all the same. Your father taught us that sometimes the best way to be strong is to take care of something smaller than yourself." The community response to Thunder and Pip's extended stay in Portland had been overwhelming. Local news stations had covered their story multiple times, focusing on both the therapeutic work they were doing at OHSU and the personal family reunion taking place. Donations poured in for the hospital's pediatric wing, along with offers of support for other families dealing with childhood illnesses. Thunder found himself inadvertently becoming a spokesperson for the healing power of human-animal bonds, giving interviews that he would have avoided just months earlier. But Maya's encouragement gave him confidence to share their story, to help other people understand that transformation was possible at any age. "You're changing how people think about tough guys," Maya told him after watching one of his television interviews. "You're showing them that real strength comes from being willing to be vulnerable, to admit that you need help and healing just like everyone else." The hospital visits had become a daily routine, with Pip making rounds through the pediatric wing, while Thunder spent time with Maya and Alex. But Thunder also found himself gravitating toward other parts of the hospital, particularly the oncology ward, where families were dealing with the same devastating uncertainty that had become his daily reality. In the family lounge of the cancer center, Thunder met other parents and spouses who were watching their loved ones fight for their lives. He listened more than he spoke, offering the kind of presence he'd learned from Pip's example. Sometimes comfort came not from words, but from simply being willing to sit with someone in their darkest moment. "My wife doesn't want to talk about dying," a man named James confided to Thunder one afternoon. "She says it's giving up being negative. But I need to talk about it with someone because I'm terrified of losing her." Thunder understood that fear intimately. Every day with Maya felt precious and fragile, shadowed by the knowledge that their time together was limited. But he'd also learned that avoiding difficult conversations didn't make them go away. "Maybe she's not ready yet," Thunder suggested. "But you can let her know that when she is ready, you'll be there to listen. Sometimes that's all we can do. Be present and wait for them to tell us what they need." These conversations reminded Thunder of his own journey from emotional isolation to connection. For decades, he'd been the person who avoided difficult topics, who ran from vulnerability rather than embracing it. But watching Maya face her mortality with grace and courage had taught him that there was strength in acknowledging fear, wisdom in admitting uncertainty. One evening, as Thunder tucked Alex into bed in the small bedroom they'd set up for him at the house, the little boy asked a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Grandpa, when Mama dies, will you be sad forever?" Thunder sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "I'll be very sad for a long time, buddy. But I'll also be happy that I got to know your mama, that I got to be your grandpa, that I got to love both of you." Sad and happy can exist at the same time. Alex nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness that children often brought to life's biggest questions. "Will you still take care of Pip after Mama goes to heaven?" "Of course I will. Pip and I have a lot more work to do, helping other people the way we helped your Mama. And someday when you're older, maybe you can help us too." "I'd like that," Alex said, his eyes growing heavy with sleep. "I want to help kids feel better, just like you and Pip do." As Thunder watched his grandson drift off to sleep, he felt the weight of legacy settling on his shoulders. This little boy would carry memories of these weeks for the rest of his life, would remember the grandfather who came back, who chose love over isolation, who proved that it was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. The handwritten letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November, delivered not by mail, but by Maya's own trembling fingers as Thunder sat beside her hospital bed. The latest round of treatments had failed, and the oncology team had gently suggested that it was time to focus on comfort rather than cure. Maya's strength was fading visibly, but her spirit remained unbroken. "I wrote this when I was having a good day last week," Maya said, pressing the sealed envelope into Thunder's hands. "I want you to read it after I'm not here anymore. It's my final wishes and my blessing for what comes next." Thunder's fingers traced the edges of the envelope, feeling the weight of words not yet spoken, instructions not yet given. Maya's handwriting on the outside was careful and deliberate. "For my father, when the time comes." "Maya, sweetheart, you don't have to do this now. We have time." Maya's smile was gentle but firm. "Dad, we both know we don't have much time left. The doctors are talking about days, maybe weeks. I need to make sure you understand what I want for Alex, for you, for the work you and Pip are doing." Over the past month, Maya's condition had deteriorated with heartbreaking swiftness. The brief periods of energy and clarity were becoming shorter, separated by longer stretches of pain and exhaustion. But during her lucid moments, she'd been planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her a successful architect. She'd worked with David to finalize Alex's custody arrangements, ensuring that Thunder would have legal visitation rights and an official role in his grandson's life. She'd written letters to Alex for future birthdays and milestones, each one sealed and dated for David to deliver when the time was right. She'd even recorded video messages on her phone, wanting Alex to have her voice and her image to remember her by. "I want you to promise me something," Maya said, her voice growing weaker but more urgent. "Promise me you won't stop what you're doing with Pip, the hospitals, the children, all the people you're helping. Don't let grief make you retreat back into that shell you lived in for so many years." Thunder squeezed her hand gently. "I promise, sweetheart. But how can I do this work without you to inspire me? How can I help other people when I couldn't help the person who mattered most?" "Oh, Dad." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You did help me. You gave me something I'd been missing my entire adult life. You gave me my father back. You showed me that people can change, that love can overcome years of pain and distance. That's the greatest gift anyone could have given me." Dr. Patterson had arranged for Pip to have unlimited access to Maya's room, recognizing that the tiny horse provided comfort that medical interventions couldn't match. Pip seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, spending most of his time lying quietly beside Maya's bed, his presence a constant source of calm in the increasingly chaotic world of end-stage cancer care. Alex visited every day after school, his 6-year-old resilience both heartbreaking and inspiring. He'd accepted his mother's illness with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often showed toward things adults struggled to understand. He brought her drawings, told her about his day, and read to her from his favorite picture books with the same patience she'd once shown him. "Mama, I drew you and Pip flying together," Alex said one afternoon, showing Maya a crayon drawing of a woman with wings riding a tiny horse through clouds. "Daddy says when you go to heaven, you'll be able to fly anywhere you want." Maya hugged the drawing to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's perfect, sweetheart. I'll keep it with me always." Thunder found himself serving as a bridge between the medical staff and the family, translating complex medical terminology into language that Alex could understand, and helping David navigate the difficult decisions that came with palliative care. His experience with Catherine's final days provided practical knowledge, but more importantly, his presence offered emotional support to a family struggling with grief they weren't ready to face. The Hells Angels had maintained a constant but discreet presence, taking turns staying at the KOA campground to provide Thunder with backup and support. They understood that this was about more than saying goodbye to Maya. This was about Thunder's transformation into someone none of them had ever seen before, someone who put family and healing ahead of everything else. "Never thought I'd see Thunder changing diapers and reading bedtime stories," Bull confided to Razor during one of their visits. "But maybe this is who he was always meant to be." The transformation was evident to everyone who knew Thunder's history. Hospital staff, who'd initially been wary of the leather-clad biker, now sought his advice on dealing with difficult family situations. Other parents in the oncology ward looked to him for guidance and support. Children throughout the hospital asked for him by name, wanting to spend time with the gentle giant who understood their fears and pain. But the most profound change was in Thunder's relationship with vulnerability itself. For 60 years, he'd equated emotional openness with weakness, believing that showing fear or sadness would diminish his strength and authority. Maya's illness had taught him that the opposite was true. His willingness to be present in his grief, to admit his terror and uncertainty, had made him more powerful than any display of physical toughness ever could. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid," Thunder told Dr. Chen during one of their weekly phone calls. But watching Maya face this disease, seeing how she finds strength in admitting her fears, I'm learning that real courage is being afraid and showing up anyway. Dr. Chen had become an unexpected source of emotional support during Thunder's time in Portland, their professional relationship evolving into something deeper and more personal. She'd driven up from California twice to check on Pip and to offer Thunder the kind of companionship that only someone who understood his journey could provide. "You're not the same man who called me about a starving miniature horse 8 months ago," she observed during her most recent visit. "You've become someone I barely recognize. Is that good or bad?" Thunder asked, only half joking. "It's miraculous," Dr. Chen replied without hesitation. "It's proof that transformation is possible at any age, that love really can change everything about who we are and who we're capable of becoming." The preparations for Maya's death were both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. She'd chosen to spend her final days at home, surrounded by the life she'd built with David and Alex. Thunder had moved his trailer into their driveway, wanting to be close enough to help with whatever was needed, while still maintaining the independence that defined his relationship with the world. Pip had adapted to the house with his characteristic grace, seeming to understand that his role now was simply to provide comfort and presence during the most difficult time any of them had ever faced. He stayed close to Maya when she was awake, offering his soft nose for her to stroke when pain medication made conversation difficult. When she slept, he positioned himself where Alex could find comfort in his steady breathing and warm presence. "I never imagined I'd die surrounded by so much love," Maya told Thunder during one of their quiet evening conversations. "For years, I thought I'd face this alone, angry and bitter about all the relationships that had failed. But having you here, seeing how much you've changed, knowing that Alex will have his grandfather in his life, it makes everything easier." Thunder felt the familiar tightness in his throat that had become his constant companion during these final weeks. "I wish I could take this away from you, sweetheart. I wish I could trade places with you. I know you do. But Dad, this is my journey, just like your journey with Pip was something you had to do for yourself. You can't fix this, but you can be present for it. That's all any of us can do for the people we love." As Thunder prepared for sleep in his trailer that night, he thought about the letter Maya had given him, still unopened in his jacket pocket. Whatever instructions it contained, whatever final requests she'd made, he knew he would honor them completely. She'd given him the gift of redemption, the chance to be the father and grandfather he'd always been capable of being. The least he could do was ensure that her faith in him was justified. Maya's ashes would eventually rest in a small ceramic urn that Alex had chosen himself, painted with sunflowers and tiny horses in bright primary colors. But on the morning she died, peacefully in her sleep with David holding one hand and Thunder holding the other, the weight of loss felt immeasurable, as if the entire world had shifted on its axis. It was Pip who noticed first. The tiny horse, who had been sleeping on his mat beside Maya's bed, suddenly lifted his head and moved closer to her still form. He stood quietly for a moment, then gently nuzzled her hand with the same tenderness he'd shown countless other patients during their journey together. It was as if he was saying goodbye, offering his own form of blessing for her passage from one world to the next. Thunder felt the absence immediately, a silence where Maya's labored breathing had been just moments before. For weeks, he'd been preparing himself for this moment, but the reality was still a shock. His daughter was gone, and with her, the chance to make up for all the years they'd lost, all the conversations they'd never had, all the moments he'd missed by choosing pride over love. David wept quietly, his grief raw and immediate. Thunder found himself moving into a role he'd never expected to fill, becoming the steady presence that held the family together during those first impossible hours. He made phone calls to doctors and funeral directors, handled the practical details that needed attention, and most importantly, he helped Alex understand what had happened. "Is Mama really in heaven now?" Alex asked, standing beside his mother's bed with the solemn confusion of a 6-year-old, trying to process the incomprehensible. "Yes, buddy," Thunder said, lifting Alex into his arms. "She's not hurting anymore, and she's watching over us from somewhere beautiful and peaceful. Can she see Pip? Can she see us?" Thunder looked at Maya's serene face, free from the pain that had marked her final weeks. "I think she can see everything that matters to her. All the love in this room, all the people who are going to miss her, all the beautiful things she helped create." The funeral was held 4 days later at a small chapel in southeast Portland, attended by a remarkable cross-section of people whose lives Maya had touched. Her architectural colleagues, David's family, neighbors and friends from their community, and hospital staff who had come to know and love her during her treatment. The Hells Angels attended in full dress, their leather jackets a stark contrast to the other mourners, but their grief equally sincere. Thunder had been asked to deliver the eulogy, a responsibility that terrified him more than any combat situation he'd ever faced. But standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of people who had loved his daughter, he found words he didn't know he possessed. "Maya taught me that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be," Thunder said, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. "She showed me that real strength comes from vulnerability, that real courage means admitting your fears and choosing love anyway. She gave me the chance to be her father when it mattered most, and that's a gift I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." He spoke about Maya's creativity, her compassion, her ability to see beauty in unexpected places. He talked about Alex and the legacy of love that would continue through him. And he promised that he would honor Maya's memory by continuing the work she'd encouraged, by using the time he had left to bring healing and hope to others who needed it after the service. As the mourners gathered in the chapel's fellowship hall, Thunder was approached by Dr. Patterson from OHSU. The pediatric coordinator had tears in her eyes as she embraced him. "Maya was special," Dr. Patterson said. "But what you two accomplished together in those final weeks, the way you supported not just her, but every family in that wing, it was extraordinary. I hope you know how much difference you made." Thunder nodded, too emotionally drained to trust his voice. But Dr. Patterson's words reminded him of Maya's final request, her insistence that he continue their therapeutic work despite his grief. She'd understood something that Thunder was only beginning to grasp, that healing others was often the best way to heal yourself. The reception was a celebration of Maya's life as much as a mourning of her death. People shared stories about her kindness, her creativity, her ability to make others feel valued and understood. David spoke about their plans to start a foundation in Maya's name, focused on supporting families dealing with childhood cancer. Alex, with the resilience that only children possessed, played quietly with other young cousins while the adults processed their grief. Thunder found himself drawn to a corner of the hall where some of Maya's architectural drawings were displayed. Her designs showed a vision of spaces that brought people together, buildings that served community needs while respecting the natural environment. Even in her professional work, Maya had been focused on healing and connection. "She would have been proud of you today," David said, joining Thunder beside the display. "The eulogy, the way you've held our family together these past few days. You've become the father she always hoped you could be." Thunder studied a drawing Maya had made for a children's hospital wing, complete with gardens and play areas designed to make young patients feel less isolated from the world beyond their illness. "I just wish I'd had more time with her, more chances to get it right." "You did get it right," David insisted. "Maybe not for all the years you missed, but for the time that mattered most. Maya died knowing she was loved by her father. Not every daughter gets that gift." That evening, Thunder sat alone in his trailer with Pip, reading Maya's letter for the first time. Her handwriting was shaky but determined, her words chosen with the same care she'd brought to everything else in her life. "Dad," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably drowning in grief and guilt. Stop it. You have work to do, and I need you to be strong enough to do it. First, about Alex. I know David will be a wonderful single father, but Alex needs his grandfather too. Not the man you used to be, but the man you've become. Teach him about motorcycles and horses and standing up for people who can't protect themselves. Show him that real men are gentle with things smaller than themselves. Second, about your work with Pip. What you two are doing is bigger than you realize. You're not just entertaining sick kids or making people smile. You're proving that transformation is possible, that healing can come from the most unexpected places. Don't stop, because I'm not here to encourage you. Stop only when you've helped everyone you possibly can. Finally, about forgiveness. Forgive yourself for the father you used to be, and forgive me for waiting until I was dying to let you back into my life. We both made mistakes, but we also made something beautiful out of the time we had left. I love you, Dad. Go save the world, one tiny horse visit at a time. Your daughter, Maya. Thunder read the letter 3 times, tears blurring his vision as Maya's voice seemed to echo in the small space of the trailer. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the KOA campground, families settling in for the night, children laughing in the distance. Life continued despite loss. Hope persisted despite grief. Pip watched him from his travel stall, patient and understanding as always. The tiny horse had lost Maya too, but he seemed to sense that their work was far from over, that this ending was also a beginning. Thunder folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet, next to Alex's drawings and the growing collection of photos from their journey. Tomorrow would bring decisions about the future, plans for continuing their mission, conversations about how to honor Maya's memory through action rather than just words. But tonight, Thunder simply sat with his grief and his gratitude, processing the profound truth that love could survive death, that legacy lived on in changed hearts and transformed lives. Maya was gone, but the man she'd helped him become would carry her influence forward for whatever years remained to him. The therapy animal certification arrived in the mail 6 months later, an official recognition of what Thunder and Pip had been doing instinctively since their first hospital visit in Arizona. The certificate was signed by officials from the National Registry of Animal-Assisted Therapy Professionals, acknowledging their completion of training programs, health evaluations, and behavioral assessments that proved their competency as a therapeutic team. Thunder framed the certificate and hung it in the tiny office space he'd created in his trailer, next to photos from their travels and letters from families they'd helped. But the real validation came from the waiting list of hospitals, schools, and community centers that wanted to schedule visits. Word of their work had spread through professional networks and social media, creating demand that far exceeded what one man and one miniature horse could possibly meet. They'd spent the winter in Portland, living in David's driveway and maintaining their connection to Alex, while Thunder processed his grief and planned their next phase. The proximity to Maya's family had been healing for all of them, giving Alex daily access to his grandfather and giving Thunder the chance to be present for the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. "Tell me about the time you and Mama rode the Ferris wheel," Alex would say, snuggled against Thunder's side during their evening reading sessions. These stories had become a ritual, a way of keeping Maya's memory alive while building new memories between grandfather and grandson. Dr. Chen had driven up from California several times during those months, ostensibly to check on Pip's health, but really to provide companionship for Thunder as he navigated his new reality. Their relationship had deepened gradually, built on shared understanding of loss and the healing power of caring for other living beings. "You know," Dr. Chen said during one of her visits, "I've been thinking about relocating my practice. Portland has some excellent veterinary opportunities, and I could provide more consistent support for your work with Pip." Thunder looked up from the harness he'd been repairing, surprised by the implications of her statement. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that what you're doing is important, and I'd like to be part of it. Not just as Pip's veterinarian, but as your partner in this mission." The proposal touched Thunder more deeply than he'd expected. For most of his adult life, he'd been fiercely independent, resistant to partnerships that might compromise his freedom or autonomy. But Maya's death had taught him about the importance of connection, the strength that came from allowing others to share your burdens and your purpose. "I'd like that," Thunder said simply. "I'd like that very much." Their first official certification visit was to Seattle Children's Hospital, a sprawling medical complex that served the entire Pacific Northwest. Thunder approached the assignment with the methodical preparation that had once characterized his military missions, studying the layout of the hospital, researching the staff, and developing a schedule that would maximize their impact while minimizing stress on Pip. The response exceeded even Thunder's optimistic expectations. Children who hadn't spoken since their admissions found their voices when Pip entered their rooms. Teenagers undergoing chemotherapy forgot their self-consciousness and giggled as they fed carrots to the tiny horse. Parents who'd been maintaining brave facades for weeks broke down in tears of relief when they saw their children smile for the first time in months. "This is remarkable," Dr. Sandra Williams, the chief of pediatric oncology, told Thunder as they concluded their first day. "I've been working with seriously ill children for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like the response to your therapy team." Thunder watched through the window as Pip posed patiently for one final photograph with a group of young patients. "It's not magic," he said. "It's just connection. Sometimes people need to be reminded that they're not alone, that someone cares enough to show up for them." The certification process had required Thunder to complete courses in child psychology, medical ethics, and animal behavior. At 63, returning to formal education had been daunting, but Maya's encouragement had given him the motivation to persevere. The knowledge he'd gained transformed his understanding of their work, helping him recognize the deeper therapeutic principles underlying their intuitive approach. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal was Thunder's own story of transformation. During their hospital visits, he would often share selected details about his journey from isolation to connection, his evolution from someone who avoided emotional vulnerability to someone who embraced it as a source of strength. "I used to think that caring about other people made you weak," Thunder would tell teenage patients who were struggling with their own fears and uncertainties. "But I learned that the opposite is true. The strongest people I know are the ones who aren't afraid to admit when they need help, who can ask for support when life gets overwhelming." These conversations often resonated with young patients in ways that traditional counseling approaches couldn't match. Thunder's leather jacket and motorcycle background gave him credibility with rebellious teenagers, while his obvious gentleness with Pip demonstrated that toughness and tenderness weren't mutually exclusive. The expansion of their program had been gradual but purposeful. Dr. Chen had indeed relocated to Portland, establishing a practice that specialized in therapy animals while providing full-time support for Thunder and Pip's mission. Together, they developed protocols for training other human-animal teams, sharing their knowledge with veterans, seniors, and other individuals who wanted to contribute to therapeutic work. "What we're really doing is creating a movement," Dr. Chen explained to a group of potential therapy teams during one of their training workshops. "We're proving that healing doesn't just happen in medical facilities with traditional treatments. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply the presence of someone who cares." Thunder found himself becoming an accidental expert on the science of human-animal bonding, reading research papers and attending conferences that explored the neurological and psychological mechanisms underlying their work. The academic knowledge enhanced his practical experience, giving him vocabulary to explain why interactions with Pip produce such profound effects on patients and their families. But the most meaningful validation came from the stories that followed them wherever they went. Letters from parents whose children had found courage through meeting Pip, updates from hospital staff about patients who'd made breakthrough progress after their visits, photographs sent by families showing children who'd incorporated lessons about compassion and resilience into their daily lives. One letter, From a mother in Phoenix whose 8-year-old daughter had been treated for leukemia, captured the essence of their impact. Emma talks about Pip every day, almost a year after your visit. She says that if a tiny horse can be brave enough to help sick kids, then she can be brave enough to handle anything. You didn't just entertain her for an afternoon. You gave her a different way of thinking about courage and strength. These testimonials reminded Thunder of Maya's words in her final letter, her insistence that their work was bigger than they realized. They weren't just visiting hospitals and schools. They were changing how people thought about healing, demonstrating that transformation was possible at any age, under any circumstances. The memorial garden that Thunder had created for Maya at David's house had become a place of pilgrimage for many of the families they'd helped. Located in the backyard, surrounded by sunflowers and miniature roses, it featured a bench where visitors could sit and reflect. A small plaque bore Maya's words, "Real strength comes from being willing to be vulnerable." Alex, now 7 years old, had become Thunder's unofficial assistant during their Portland area visits. Under careful supervision, he would help with Pip's care and interact with other children who were facing medical challenges. His natural empathy and first-hand experience with loss made him surprisingly effective at connecting with young patients. "Grandpa Thunder and Pip helped my mama when she was really sick," Alex would tell other children with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children possessed. "They can't make the sickness go away, but they can make you feel less scared." As their second year of certified work began, Thunder reflected on the unexpected trajectory his life had taken. From a lonely, bitter man living above an auto repair shop to a nationally recognized therapy team coordinator seemed like an impossible transformation. But Maya had been right about one thing. Change was possible at any age if you were willing to let love remake you completely. Looking ahead, Thunder could see years of meaningful work stretching before them. Hospitals to visit, children to comfort, families to support. But more than that, he could see a legacy taking shape, a ripple effect of healing that would extend far beyond any individual visit or interaction. Maya's death had taught him that love survived loss, that purpose could emerge from pain, that the most profound transformations often came through the deepest suffering. Now every day with Pip was both a tribute to his daughter's memory and a gift to others who needed to believe that hope could survive even the darkest circumstances. The new Hells Angels patch that Thunder designed was smaller than traditional club insignia, intended to be worn alongside rather than replace the classic Death Head logo. It featured a pair of wings wrapped protectively around a tiny figure, with the words "Guardian Angels" embroidered in silver thread beneath. The patch represented a new chapter within the club, one focused on community service and healing rather than rebellion and intimidation. The idea had emerged during a club meeting in Bakersfield, the same town where Thunder had first purchased Pip nearly 2 years earlier. Thunder had been invited to speak about his work with therapy animals, sharing his story with brothers who'd known him as the toughest enforcer on the West Coast, but now saw him as something entirely different. "What Thunder's doing changes how people see us," Razor had said, addressing the assembled members. "Instead of being afraid of Hell's Angels, people are starting to associate us with healing and hope. That's powerful. That's something we can build on." The response had been mixed but encouraging. Some of the younger members struggled to understand how community service aligned with their image of outlaw motorcycle culture. But the older members, men who'd ridden with Thunder for decades, recognized the wisdom in expanding their identity beyond its traditional boundaries. "Been thinking about this since Catherine's funeral," Bull admitted after the meeting. "Watching Thunder find purpose in helping others, seeing how much it's changed him. Maybe it's time we all found ways to use our strength for something bigger than ourselves." The Guardian Angels program started small, with just 5 members volunteering to work with local animal shelters and veterans organizations. Thunder provided training based on his experience with Pip. teaching his brothers how to approach therapeutic work with the same dedication and attention to detail they'd once applied to motorcycle maintenance and club business. Diesel was the first to adopt a rescue animal, a three-legged German shepherd named Sergeant, who'd been abandoned after losing his limb in a car accident. The dog's obvious military bearing appealed to Diesel's own army background, and together they began visiting VA hospitals throughout Southern California. "Never thought I'd be reading bedtime stories to sick kids," Diesel confided to Thunder during one of their joint hospital visits. "But there's something about seeing a tough old soldier like Sergeant overcome his challenges that gives these guys hope." The transformation within the club was gradual but unmistakable. Members who'd once spent their free time in bars and pool halls now volunteered at animal shelters and community centers. The clubhouse that had once been exclusively focused on motorcycle culture now hosted training sessions for therapy animal teams and planning meetings for charitable events. The annual toy run, which had been a Hells Angels tradition for decades, expanded into a year-round program of community support. Members organized food drives for families affected by childhood cancer, sponsored therapy animal training for other motorcycle clubs, and established a scholarship fund for children who'd lost parents to military service. People don't know what to think when they see Hells Angels volunteering at the children's hospital, Thunder observed to Dr. Chen as they watched Razor carefully lead a group of young patients in wheelchair races through the hospital corridors. "It challenges every assumption they have about who we are and what we represent." The media attention that followed the Guardian Angels program was intense, but largely positive. News organizations that had once portrayed the Hells Angels as dangerous outlaws now featured stories about their community service work. Television documentaries explored the psychology of transformation, using Thunder's journey as an example of how people could reinvent themselves completely while maintaining their core identity. But Thunder remained focused on the practical work rather than the publicity. Each week brought new requests for visits, new opportunities to demonstrate that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. The original route they'd traveled across the country had become a permanent circuit, with hospitals and schools marking their calendars months in advance for return visits. The anniversary trip to the Kern County livestock auction was Thunder's idea, a pilgrimage back to the place where his transformation had begun. He'd arranged to purchase another neglected miniature horse, this time as part of a coordinated rescue effort involving several Guardian Angels members. 2 years ago, I came here looking for equipment and found Pip instead, Thunder told the assembled crowd of reporters and club members who'd gathered for the event. Today we're here intentionally, looking for animals who need second chances and people who are ready to provide them. The auction itself had changed in response to the attention Thunder's story had brought. Better conditions for the animals, more careful screening of potential buyers, and partnerships with rescue organizations to ensure that neglected livestock found appropriate homes. The auctioneer who'd sold Pip to Thunder now served as an advocate for animal welfare, using his platform to educate buyers about proper care and treatment. The miniature horse that Thunder selected was a young mare, barely a year old, who'd been surrendered by owners who couldn't afford her care. Unlike Pip's traumatic background, this little horse was healthy but shy, needing socialization and training rather than medical intervention. "Going to call her Hope," Thunder announced as he led the tiny horse toward the trailer. "Seems appropriate for a new beginning." The Guardian Angels program had attracted national attention from other motorcycle clubs, veterans organizations, and community groups interested in replicating their model. Thunder found himself traveling to conferences and workshops, sharing the practical knowledge and emotional insights that had made their work successful. "The key is authenticity," Thunder would tell audiences of potential therapy animal handlers. "You can't fake genuine care and connection. Animals know when you're being real with them, and so do the people you're trying to help. If you're doing this for the wrong reasons, it won't work." The questions that followed his presentations often focused on the transformation itself, the process by which a hardened biker had become a gentle healer. Thunder had developed a repertoire of stories and insights that helped others understand that change was possible for anyone willing to embrace vulnerability and service. I spent 60 years building walls around my heart, thinking that made me strong, Thunder would explain. But real strength came when I tore those walls down and let myself care about something smaller and more fragile than myself. Everything good in my life started from that moment of choosing love over fear. The success of the Guardian Angels program had led to formal partnerships with national organizations focused on animal-assisted therapy and veteran support services. The Hells Angels' reputation for loyalty and dedication, once applied primarily to club business, now served the broader community in ways that surprised everyone involved. But for Thunder, the most meaningful measure of success remained the individual connections. The moment when a sick child smiled while petting Pip, the veteran who found peace through working with a rescue animal, the family who discovered hope in the midst of their darkest hour. This isn't about changing the Hells Angels, Thunder told a reporter who was writing a feature story about the Guardian Angels program. It's about discovering who we really were all along. Underneath all the leather and attitude, we're people who care about protecting those who can't protect themselves. We just found a better way to do it. The ripple effects of their work extended far beyond the immediate participants. Other motorcycle clubs had started their own therapy animal programs. Veterans groups had incorporated animal-assisted healing into their support services. Hospitals across the country had developed protocols for working with non-traditional therapy teams. Most importantly, the stereotype of the dangerous, antisocial biker was slowly giving way to a more nuanced understanding of motorcycle culture and its potential for positive community impact. The Hells Angels logo still commanded respect, but increasingly it was the respect accorded to those who used their strength in service of others. As Thunder prepared for another cross-country journey with Pip and Hope, he reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by one impulsive decision at a livestock auction. The angry, isolated man who'd purchased a dying miniature horse for $50 would barely recognize the person he'd become. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the best transformations were the ones that surprised you with their completeness. Thunder's autobiography manuscript lay spread across the small table in his trailer, 300 pages of handwritten memories and insights that Dr. Chen was helping him transform into publishable form. The book had been her idea, proposed during one of their quiet evenings together as a way to preserve the lessons of his journey for others who might need to believe that change was possible. Your story has power beyond the individual lives you touch, Dr. Chen had argued. There are people all over the country, all over the world, who need to hear that transformation is possible at any age. Under any circumstances, the writing process had been more difficult than Thunder expected. Confronting his past mistakes and failures on paper forced him to relive moments he'd spent decades trying to forget. The angry young soldier returning from Desert Storm, the neglectful father who'd chosen his motorcycle over his family, the bitter widower who'd retreated into isolation after Catherine's death. But Dr. Chen's gentle persistence had helped him find words for experiences that had seemed beyond description. She'd encouraged him to be honest about his failures, while also celebrating the growth that had followed. The result was a narrative that was both brutally self-aware and ultimately hopeful. Chapter 12 might be the most important part, Dr. Chen said, reviewing the section where Thunder described Maya's final letter and his decision to honor her wishes by continuing their therapeutic work. It shows that healing can emerge from the deepest grief, that purpose can be found even in loss. The publisher who'd expressed interest in the book was a small press that specialized in memoirs about second chances and personal transformation. They'd been impressed by the media coverage of Thunder's work and believed his story could inspire Others, who felt trapped by their circumstances or past mistakes. We see this as more than just a memoir, the editor had explained during their phone conversation. This is a roadmap for personal transformation, a practical guide for anyone who wants to find meaning and purpose in the second half of their life. The book tour that followed publication took Thunder and Pip to venues he'd never imagined visiting. University campuses where students studying psychology and social work wanted to understand the mechanics of therapeutic intervention. Corporate conferences where business leaders sought insights into organizational transformation. Churches and community centers where ordinary people were looking for hope and direction. At each stop, Thunder shared not just his personal story, but the practical knowledge he'd gained about healing and connection. He'd developed a presentation that combined memoir with education, using photographs and videos from their hospital visits to illustrate the principles underlying successful therapeutic work. The most important thing I learned, Thunder would tell his audiences, is that healing is a mutual process. When we help others, we help ourselves. When we open our hearts to someone else's pain, we create space for our own healing to begin. The questions that followed his presentations often focused on the practical aspects of starting therapeutic work. How to identify appropriate animals for therapy training. How to develop partnerships with hospitals and schools. How to maintain emotional boundaries while remaining authentically present for people in crisis. But Thunder was most moved by the personal stories that people shared with him after his presentations. Veterans who'd found purpose through working with rescue animals. Parents who'd discovered strength they didn't know they possessed while caring for sick children. Seniors who'd overcome isolation by volunteering in their communities. "Your story gave me permission to start over at 68, one woman told him after a presentation in Minneapolis. "I'd been widowed for 5 years and thought my useful life was over. But hearing about your transformation made me realize that maybe my best years are still ahead of me." The training program that Thunder had developed for veterans interested in therapy, animal work had become a national model, replicated by VA hospitals and veterans organizations across the country. The curriculum combined practical animal handling skills with psychological preparation for working with trauma survivors and medical patients. What makes Thunder's program unique, explained Dr. Maria Santos, a VA psychologist who'd implemented the training at 3 different medical centers, is that it's designed by someone who understands both sides of the equation. He knows what it's like to be a veteran, struggling with purpose and meaning. And he knows what it's like to find healing through service to others. The scholarship fund that had been established in Maya's name now provided financial support for therapy animal training to low-income individuals who wanted to volunteer but couldn't afford the certification costs. The fund had grown beyond Thunder's initial expectations, supported by donations from people who'd been touched by his story and wanted to extend its impact. Alex, now 8 years old, had become Thunder's unofficial co-author, contributing drawings and occasional insights that added a child's perspective to the adult narrative. His artwork graced several pages of the book, including the original crayon drawing that had introduced Thunder to his grandson. "Alex has a natural understanding of what we're doing," Thunder observed to Dr. Chen as they watched the boy interact with Hope during one of their Portland visits. "He sees the connection between caring for animals and caring for people in a way that adults sometimes have to learn." The expansion of their program to include other species had been gradual but purposeful. Dogs, cats, rabbits, and even a rescued goat named Gertie had joined their therapeutic roster. Each animal chosen for its specific temperament and ability to connect with different populations. "Pip remains our flagship," Thunder explained to a reporter documenting their program's growth. "But we've learned that different animals appeal to different people. Some children who are afraid of horses feel comfortable with rabbits. Some veterans connect better with dogs who've overcome their own traumatic experiences." The success of the book had brought unexpected opportunities. Television networks wanted to develop documentary series about their work. Hollywood producers had inquired about film rights. Corporate sponsors offered funding for expanded programs, but Thunder remained focused on the essential mission, bringing healing and hope to people who needed it most. The fame and recognition were gratifying, but they were secondary to the daily work of visiting hospitals, training new therapy teams, and proving that transformation was possible for anyone willing to embrace it. Sometimes I think about that day at the auction. Thunder reflected during a quiet moment with Dr. Chen and Pip in their Portland base camp. I thought I was just saving a dying horse, but really he was saving me. Everything good that's happened since then can be traced back to that moment when I chose compassion over indifference. The ripple effects of their work continued to expand in ways Thunder couldn't have anticipated. Medical schools now included courses on animal-assisted therapy in their curricula. Social work programs trained students to incorporate therapy animals into their practice. Elementary schools developed character education programs based on the principles of caring for vulnerable creatures. What you've created goes far beyond therapy visits, Dr. Chen observed. You've started a movement that's changing how we think about healing, about masculinity, about the potential for transformation at any stage of life. As Thunder prepared for another book tour event, this time at a conference for healthcare professionals in Chicago, he thought about the audience he'd be addressing. Doctors, nurses, therapists, and administrators who dedicated their lives to healing others, but often struggled with their own emotional needs. His message would be simple but profound, that the act of caring for others was itself a form of medicine, that vulnerability was a source of strength, and that it was never too late to discover your true purpose in life. These weren't just platitudes or motivational slogans. They were truths he'd lived, tested through experience, and proven in the countless lives that had been touched by his journey with Pip. The book's dedication read simply, "For Maya, who taught me that love survives death, and for Alex, who reminds me every day that hope survives loss." But Thunder knew the real dedication was broader than that. It was for everyone who'd ever felt lost, broken, or forgotten. Everyone who needed to believe that second chances were possible, that transformation could happen at any age, that healing could emerge from the most unexpected places. The golden sunset photograph was taken 5 years later on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean near Monterey, California. Thunder sat on a weathered piece of driftwood with Pip beside him, both of them silhouetted against the amber sky as waves crashed on the rocks below. Dr. Chen had captured the moment during one of their weekend retreats, a perfect image of peace and contentment that seemed to summarize everything their journey had accomplished. Thunder was 67 now, his beard completely gray, and his face marked by the kind of lines that came from years of genuine laughter and hard-won wisdom. Pip, at 14, moved more slowly than he once had, but his intelligence and gentleness remained unchanged. They'd visited over 300 hospitals and schools together, touched the lives of thousands of patients and families, and inspired countless others to find their own paths to healing and service. The marriage to Dr. Chen had taken place 2 years earlier in Maya's memorial garden, surrounded by sunflowers and attended by an unlikely congregation of Hell's Angels, veterinarians, hospital staff, and families they'd helped over the years. Alex, now 10 years old, had served as ring-bearer, proudly carrying the simple bands that symbolized a love built on shared purpose and mutual respect. "I never thought I'd marry again," Thunder had told Razor before the ceremony. "After Catherine, I thought that part of my life was over. But Sarah helped me understand that love doesn't diminish when you share it. It multiplies." Their honeymoon had been a working trip to children's hospitals in Hawaii, combining their personal celebration with their ongoing mission. The photographs from that week showed a couple who'd found joy, not just in each other, but in the work they did together, the lives they touched, the healing they facilitated wherever they went. The national network of Guardian Angels chapters now included over 200 members across 43 states. Each group focused on community service and therapeutic work with rescue animals. The program had become a model for other motorcycle clubs, seeking to redefine their public image and find meaningful ways to serve their communities. What Thunder started has changed the entire culture of motorcycle clubs, observed Dr. James Mitchell, a sociologist who'd written extensively about the transformation. Instead of being seen as anti-social rebels, these groups are now recognized as valuable community resources. It's a remarkable example of how individual transformation can create systemic change. The annual gathering in Bakersfield had become a pilgrimage site for therapy animal teams from around the world. Each summer, hundreds of handlers and their animal partners converged on the town where Thunder's journey had begun, sharing techniques, celebrating successes, and planning new initiatives for the year ahead. Thunder and Pip were always the featured speakers at these gatherings, but Thunder insisted that the focus remain on the collective work rather than their individual story. He'd developed a presentation that highlighted the achievements of other teams, the innovations in therapeutic technique, and the expanding research that validated the healing power of human-animal bonds. "We were just the beginning," Thunder would tell the assembled crowds. "The real magic is in what all of you are doing, the lives you're touching, the hope you're bringing to places that need it most." Alex had become an integral part of their extended family, spending summers traveling with Thunder and Sarah, learning the practical skills of animal care while absorbing the deeper lessons about compassion and service. At 10, he could handle Pip and Hope with expert confidence, and he'd begun training a rescue puppy named Scout for eventual therapy work. "When I grow up, I want to be a veterinarian like Grandma Sarah," Alex announced during one of their hospital visits, using the title he'd adopted for Dr. Chen. "But I also want to ride motorcycles and help kids who are scared." Thunder smiled at his grandson's ambitious plans, remembering his own childhood dreams and the circuitous path that had led him to his true calling. "You can be anything you want to be, buddy. The important thing is to choose something that lets you help other people." The scholarship program established in Maya's name had grown into a full foundation, providing funding not just for therapy animal training, but for medical research into the physiological and psychological benefits of animal-assisted intervention. The foundation's headquarters occupied a small building in Portland, staffed by volunteers and managed by David, who'd found his own healing through service to others. Maya would be amazed by what's grown from her encouragement, David told Thunder during one of their quarterly foundation meetings. She always believed that small acts of kindness could have enormous consequences. But I don't think even she imagined anything like this. The research being funded by the foundation had contributed to a growing body of scientific evidence supporting therapeutic animal programs. Studies showed measurable improvements in patient outcomes, reduced anxiety and depression, faster healing times, and increased compliance with medical treatments among people who participated in animal-assisted therapy. But for Thunder, the statistics were less important than the individual moments of connection he witnessed every day. The child who forgot about chemotherapy while brushing Pip's mane, the veteran who found peace through training a rescue dog, the elderly person who discovered renewed purpose in volunteering at an animal shelter. The cottage they'd built on David's property served as their home base between traveling assignments. Small but perfectly designed, it featured a workshop where Thunder crafted leather goods for therapy animals, an office where Sarah managed their scheduling and correspondence, and a garden where they grew vegetables and flowers that Alex loved to tend during his visits. Pip and Hope had their own pasture behind the cottage, complete with a shelter and access to the small stream that ran through the property. Other therapy animals in training often stayed there temporarily, creating a peaceful menagerie that seemed to embody the healing principles that guided all their work. This is what contentment looks like, Thunder observed to Sarah one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Pip and Hope graze in the golden light of another Pacific Northwest sunset. Not excitement or achievement or recognition, but this quiet sense that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand, understanding completely. They'd both found their way to this peaceful place through loss and struggle, through the kind of transformation that seemed impossible until it happened. Their love was built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the daily choice to serve something larger than themselves. The phone still rang regularly with requests for visits, interviews, and appearances, but Thunder had learned to maintain boundaries that protected their personal time and prevented the burnout that often claimed people in helping professions. They scheduled regular breaks, took vacations that had nothing to do with therapy work, and prioritized their relationship with each other and their extended family. The work will always be there, Thunder had learned to tell people who wanted more of his time than he could reasonably give. But if I don't take care of myself and my family, I won't be able to help anyone else. As the sun disappeared into the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Thunder reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The angry young soldier, the neglectful father, the grieving widower, the isolated biker, the reluctant rescuer of a dying horse. All these versions of himself felt like chapters in someone else's story. But they were all part of the path that had led him here, to this porch, this woman, this life of purpose and connection. Maya had been right in her final letter. Transformation was possible at any age. Healing could emerge from the deepest pain, and love really could overcome the accumulated mistakes and regrets of a lifetime. Pip wandered over to the porch, as if sensing Thunder's reflective mood. The tiny horse was moving more slowly these days, his muzzle completely white with age, but his eyes still held the same gentle intelligence that had first captured Thunder's heart at that livestock auction so many years ago. "Ready to head inside, partner?" Thunder asked, standing and stretching muscles that protested more than they used to. Pip nickered softly in response, a sound that Thunder had learned to interpret as contentment, agreement, and love all rolled into one. As they walked toward the cottage together, Thunder felt the profound satisfaction that came from a life well lived, a purpose well served, and a love story that had turned out better than anything he could have imagined.